Chapter 357. As the person in charge of all of Guangdong's penal matters, after receiving Jia Ping's filial piety, Han Qing expressed that he would protect his life, but he would have to endure it for a while. When the time was right, he would use him again. Abandoning the city and becoming the general of a defeated army seemed to be a very shameful matter. However, he was not the only one who had lost the city. At least, it looked like he had killed enemies while bathed in blood. Based on this, Han Qing had some confidence. He had even greeted the administrative commissioner, Lu Youfu, for this matter. Once the Imperial envoy arrived, he would take the opportunity to say a few good words. Presumably, the matter would pass. It was because of this that Jia Ping had the confidence to appear here. After hearing Yang Chendong's words about him, his expression changed. He immediately knelt on the ground. "Sir Imperial envoy, please understand. I did indeed bravely kill the enemy. However, the situation was like this, so I had no choice but to retreat from the city." With Jia Ping kneeling, the Guangdong Prison Bureau's Han Qing also stepped out from the ranks. General Jia Ping's words are not wrong. This time, the bandit army is indeed superior in numbers. We had no choice but to abandon the city. Imperial envoy, please understand. Han Qing stepped out and took the initiative to plead for leniency for Jia Ping. After the other Guangdong officials saw this scene, they all understood tacitly. They knew that he must have received a lot of money to save his life. Even if they were fellow officials, shouldn't they also stand out and contribute? If they formed good karma now, presumably, there would be benefits in the future. Furthermore, with the idea of dying if the lips and teeth were cold, pleading for leniency for Jia Ping now was equivalent to leaving an extra path of retreat for themselves. Who could guarantee that they would not make a mistake? All of the officials thought this way. At this time, even the Guangdong Administrative Commissioner, the highest-ranking official here, was prepared to step out and speak. As the leader of Guangdong, protecting his subordinates at critical times was one of his responsibilities. Only then could he receive the respect of others and better pass on his ideals and orders. Thus, the atmosphere in the tent became lively. Many people were eager to give it a try. As long as one person stepped out, the others would follow suit and plead for leniency. With the law not punishing the masses, presumably this young imperial envoy could not do anything to them. Everyone was waiting for Lu Youfu to make a move, and even more people's gazes landed on the chief administrator Lu Youfu. However, it was at this moment that the young voice suddenly rang out. "Oh, a loser who lost a city still had a reason? What's more, there were even people pleading for him. Very good, very good. But I wonder if there are any other lords pleading for him? Come, let this duke and this imperial envoy take a look. Let us see how united your Guangdong officials are." Lu Youfu, who was about to take a step forward with his right leg, suddenly stopped in his tracks. From these words, he felt a killing intent. From these words, he felt a resentment. From these words, he felt a chill that caused his heart to palpitate from head to toe. "A new broom sweeps clean." This phrase unknowingly appeared in his mind. At this moment, his body that was about to step forward hesitated. Lu Youfu didn't make any moves, and the other officials naturally watched quietly from the side. On the other hand, after Han Qing heard Yang Chendong's words, he stood there with his neck raised. With an unconvinced expression he asked, "But what does the imperial envoy mean by this? What does it mean?" "It is not your turn to ask me." In response to Han Qing's interruption, Yang Chendong replied without any trace of politeness. However, his words were all merciless. After these words, Han Qing's expression became very ugly. His face flushed red as if he had been constipated for a long time. What happened next made Han Qing even angrier. He saw Yang Chendong suddenly wave his hand and say to the captain of the first guards, Chiu Vi, and the others guarding the tent door, "Come, take down this criminal Jia Ping who is as cowardly as a mouse, fearful of the enemy like a tiger, and incompetent." "Yes." Having received the order, Chiu Vi and the others immediately strode over. Among them, two of the cold front guards immediately reached out and pressed down on Jia Ping's shoulders. When the large hands landed like pincers, Jia Ping's expression became pained. He even lost the ability to speak in an instant. To the side, Han Qing was shocked that Jia Ping was suddenly restrained. He suddenly pointed at Yang Chendong behind the main table and said, "You can't do this. Jia Ping's matter has not been concluded yet. How can you punish him for nothing?" We are not convinced. Not convinced? As if he had long expected Han Qing to say this, Yang Chendong abruptly stood up from his chair. Based on what Jia Ping said just now, what kind of general situation is this that they had no choice but to retreat from the city? May I ask, where did the general situation come from? What is the general situation he spoke of? Is he referring to the South Ming losing power and about to be destroyed? Yang Chendong's sudden questioning caused Han Qing's expression to change again and again. However, he was worthy of being the head of a province's police division, coming into contact with all types of criminal cases and all types of official infighting matters every day. His reaction was still extremely fast. After just an instant of change in expression, he once again calmed his mind, saying, "You are taking the meaning out of the chapter. That is not what General Jia Ping meant." Meaning? What does he mean? What do you mean? Is it because you accepted his money that you can't do things properly? Oh right. Didn't you want evidence? Here you go. With a wave of his hand, pieces of paper with words on them flew up from the table and fluttered in the air. It was as if snow had fallen from the sky. The paper fluttered over and landed on Lu Youfu and the others' bodies and feet. Out of curiosity, they stretched out their hands to receive it. When they saw the contents recorded within, every single one of them was greatly shocked. When they looked at Han Qing and Jia Ping, there was an additional look of sympathy in their eyes. When they looked at Yang Chendong, there was even more shock and fear. What was recorded on the paper were the crimes that Han Qing and Jia Ping had committed. Among them, there was the matter of Jia Ping abandoning the city and escaping because he was afraid of death, causing chaos in Zhaoqing and being taken advantage of by the bandit army. There was also the matter of Han Qing accepting 100,000 taels of silver from the Jia family behind Jia Ping and speaking for him. In these records, there were all kinds of evidence placed on them. For example, the testimony of the soldiers who escaped from death in Zhaoqing, the testimony of the housekeeper in charge of the wealth in the Jia manor, and so on. They all had handprints placed on them. This was already a fact that was set in stone. There was no need for the Imperial envoy to fake something like this because it was fake. Regardless of whether it was Han Qing or Jia Ping, they could have brought it up in front of everyone. What they would lose would only be the Imperial envoy's face. It might even cause him to not be able to continue doing this job. Putting aside whether it was worth it to wrongly accuse others like this. Jia Ping, who had also seen what was recorded on the paper, was already trembling all over. There was also Han Qing. After seeing all of this, he immediately knelt on the ground with a plop. Then he cried out loudly, "Lord Imperial Envoy, it was all my fault. I am willing to plead guilty and hand over all of this dirty silver. Please have mercy on me." As he cried out loudly, Han Qing's gaze landed on Lu Youfu, who was standing to the side. "Sir Lu, please speak to save me. You know, I was just confused for a moment." Han Qing's cries had proven everything, and it could also be said to be everything. At this moment, everyone knew that Han Qing could be considered to have met with trouble. To throw away his reputation and future for 100,000 taels of silver, no matter how it seemed, it was not worth it. Lu Youfu, who had his name called, gently closed his eyes. He really didn't want to speak for Han Qing. It was fine if he did something dirty, but if he was caught red-handed and brought up publicly, then he was an idiot. For such an idiot, if he spoke out and begged, then wouldn't he also be an idiot? However, even though the logic was like this, Lu Youfu had no choice but to reach out. It was not for any other reason than because he had a good personal relationship with Han Qing. After coming to Guangdong for a year, he had received a lot of filial piety. As a result, the two of them had a deep connection to many things. If the other party really met with trouble, if he just stood by and watched, who knew whether or not a mad dog would randomly bite people? Looking at this Imperial envoy's methods, if something really happened to offend him, he would probably be finished. Lu Youfu, who didn't want to speak, had no choice but to do so. After a moment of internal struggle, he still had no choice but to step out from the ranks. He cupped his hands toward Yang Chendong and said, "Imperial Envoy, I'm afraid this time." Han Qing was also confused for a moment. "Please, on account of his hard work in governing Guangdong, punish him leniently." Punish him leniently? Yang Chendong's gaze stared straight at Lu Youfu. Just this stare made the body of the most powerful man in Guangdong tighten. Although in terms of age, it was possible for him to be the other party's grandfather, in terms of aura, He had to admit that Yang Chendong was more dignified and pressuring than all of the young people he had seen. That pair of eyes did not even seem like the eyes of a young person. It seemed to be a pair of aged eyes that had experienced many things. It was as if they could see through anything in the world in an instant. Being questioned, Lu Youfu, whose heart had also been shaken, unconsciously said, "Yes, please be lenient with the Imperial envoy. Han Qing's family also has quite a bit of wealth. Presumably, he is willing to donate most of it to provide military supplies for the army to atone for his crime." Using money to buy a crime. This seemed to be something that could only be done in private. Now that Lu Youfu had put it on the table, it seemed very inconceivable. At least, for a scholar who had read the books of sages from a young age, it was an extremely shameful thing. However, at this moment, Lu Youfu really didn't know how to speak for Han Qing. This imperial envoy had just arrived. In terms of personal relations, there was nothing at all. He was not an official of the Southern Ming. Even if he found someone to suppress him, it would probably be very difficult. Even if it was really done, Han Qing's head would probably have already fallen to the ground. In order to save himself, he had no choice but to do this. Even when he said these words, his expression was extremely unnatural. It could be seen that he was truly embarrassed by his own words. Chapter 358. When Lu Youfu said this, Guanyin, who was standing in front of him, had an extremely ugly expression. From his point of view, the officials of Guangdong province had truly thrown away the face of the Southern Ming dynasty in today's meeting. The generals had abandoned the city and fled, and the civil officials had received dirty money. If news of this were to spread, who knew how many people would secretly mock them? However, all of this seemed to be incomparable to Lu Youfu's actions. This person had actually openly bribed. Moreover, he had done it in front of so many people. Was he not afraid that Yang Chendong would get angry again and take his anger out on him? Just as Guanyin was feeling angry and resentful, Yang Chendong, who had originally been standing there with an unfriendly expression, suddenly sat down. Then, his expression relaxed as he asked, "Oh? Willing to donate your family's wealth for military expenses? How much is that? Let me tell you, without me, the Imperial envoy, I cannot agree." If the performance of Lu Youfu and the others was already shocking, then when Yang Chendong spoke, it was as if the entire audience had been struck by lightning. At this moment, everyone stood there with a stupefied expression. There were even some people who used their hands to pull at their ears, as if trying to see if there was something wrong with their hearing. One was publicly bribing, the other was publicly bribing. Moreover, all of the people present were important officials of Guangdong. There was no lack of important officials and generals. This scene that he didn't even dare to imagine actually happened. At this moment, even Lu Youfu, who had helplessly spoken the words of bribery, was similarly shocked. He stood there, not knowing what to do. Seeing that the tent had suddenly become quiet, Yang Chendong seemed to be very displeased with everyone's performance. What? Could it be that this imperial envoy did not speak clearly enough? Or is it that the guilty official Han Qing is unwilling to pay? I am willing. After finally understanding that all of this was true, Han Qing was like a drowning person who had suddenly grabbed onto a piece of dead wood. He repeatedly said, "The guilty official is willing to pay. How much?" Yang Chendong leaned on the document in front of him and stared into Han Qing's eyes. "Pay." Han Qing thought about how Yang Chendong had said he could not take too little. Thinking that this kind of opportunity might not appear a second time, he gritted his teeth and said, "I am willing to take out 200,000 liang of silver to atone for my crimes. Please give me another chance." 200,000. Hearing such an answer, Yang Chendong repeated it softly. Then he stopped talking and looked like he was thinking. This scene really scared Han Qing. He thought that the amount of silver he offered was too little. At that moment, he hardened his heart and said, "I am willing to offer 400,000 silver taels. This is all I have. I don't have any more." "Oh, 400,000 taels. After all, you're a second-rank official of the Imperial court. You're worth this price. Since it's like this, let's forget about it. I will not pursue your crimes. As for how the Emperor will deal with you, it has nothing to do with me." Yang Chendong waved his hand. This also made Han Qing, kneeling there, let out a breath. He knew that he was fine for now. As for the emperor, based on his relationship with a few important officials in Jianghu, there was still room for negotiation. He was just afraid that he would need to borrow money to get through the disaster. Han Qing had no crimes. The kneeling Zhaoqing general Jia Ping seemed to have seen the hope of rebirth. Ignoring the pain in his body when he was pressed down, he shouted loudly, "Imperial envoy, the guilty general is also willing to use silver to atone for his crimes." "You're also willing to use silver?" Yang Chandong seemed to ask with interest. "Yes, the guilty general is willing to use silver. He is also willing to take out 400,000 taels of silver for the expenses of the mercenary army," Jia Ping said loudly as if he was afraid that Yang Chandong could not hear him clearly. "Oh, you're only a 4th-level general, yet you're willing to take out 400,000 taels of silver. It is indeed a lot." After Yang Chandong's words fell, everyone else had an expression of understanding. It seemed that Jia Ping was also going to be offended. Before everyone's expressions completely relaxed, Yang Chandong, who had been speaking peacefully, suddenly changed his expression. Following this, he shouted in a roaring voice, "Because of you, tens of thousands of people in Zhaoqing Manor have suffered. Who knows how many southern Ming soldiers have died because of this? You still have the face to talk to me about silver? Where is the Imperial sword?" "Here." Tiger's Mane, who was standing to the side, handed over the long sword that Kuang Yi had left behind. It represented that it could behead incapable rulers and slanderers. Following this, Yang Chandong reached out with his right hand and grasped the hilt of the sword. Following this, the sword flashed and the long sword was unsheathed. Then, a stream of blood flew out and coincidentally sprayed onto the face of Han Qing, who was still kneeling on the ground. The sword fell. The head of Jia Ping, who had been alive and kicking, fell to the ground, separating him from everyone else. Just like this, Jia Ping was killed. This unexpected scene caused everyone to not know what to say for a moment. They had clearly just been discussing the price. Why did he suddenly kill someone? This Imperial envoy was not old, but when he did things, it was always unexpected. It was impossible for people to guess his intentions. This kind of Imperial envoy was not easy to come into contact with. Many of the officials who saw this scene felt their hearts beat like drums. They thought that in the future, when they did things, they had to be careful to not be caught by the Imperial envoy. Otherwise, even if they didn't die, they would have to shed a layer of skin like Han Qing. As for Han Qing, when the blood sprayed onto his face, his expression first froze. Following this, he defecated and urinated. Immediately, an unpleasant smell spread out in the tent. It had to be said that as the person in charge of criminal justice and public affairs, he had seen the world. The number of people who had died under his orders was not small, so it shouldn't be like this. However, if there was something to be blamed, it was Yang Chandong's actions that were too fast. Furthermore, Han Qing himself had committed a crime. He thought that if he hadn't paid the silver earlier, his head would probably have fallen to the ground. How could he not be afraid? How could he not make a fool of himself? Yang Chandong was also very displeased by this unpleasant smell. "Forget it. We'll just go out and have a meeting." "Oh right, Jia Ping committed a serious crime and cannot be forgiven. That is why I killed him." However, some of his words cannot be disbelieved. For example, before he died, he said that the Jia family was willing to pay 400,000 liang of silver. Presumably, everyone heard it and can be used as a witness. Later, I'll have to trouble official Lu to retrieve the silver for military expenses. Of course, if the Jia family doesn't have to pay the silver, then there is no need to keep it. Bribing a high-ranking official is a serious crime and can be punished by death. Originally, everyone was covering their noses from the foul smell coming from Han Qing's body as they walked out. However, when they suddenly heard the last part of Yang Chandong's words, their expressions changed greatly. This Imperial envoy was truly a ruthless person. He killed someone and still wanted silver. This was a living king of hell. In the future, no matter who they offended, they should not offend this person. Everyone was greatly shocked. They were frightened by the methods Yang Chandong had displayed. Lu Youfu was the same, but when he heard his name being called, he reacted. He immediately replied obediently, "Yes, please be at ease, Imperial envoy. The Jia family will definitely take out the 400,000 taels of silver. However, can Jia Ping's body be sent back to the Jia family?" "Of course you can. If you want the body, Just take out another 100,000 liang of silver. Yang Chendong appeared to understand. First, he nodded his head. However, the next sentence choked Lu Youfu until he didn't know what to say. It was only the body of a dead person, yet it actually cost 100,000 liang of silver. Moreover, these words were spoken by Yang Chendong. The Jia family had no choice but to take it. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel sorrow for the Jia family. Of course, he was even more glad that he hadn't acted too excessively just now. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have been skinned alive. Lu Youfu didn't believe that Yang Chendong would let him go just because he had something on Han Qing. He even thought that the other party must have some evidence of his crimes in his hands. However, because his performance was acceptable, he didn't take it out. Thinking this way, he felt that the matter of the Jia family had to be handled seriously. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would be implicated. After Yang Chendong finished speaking, he took the lead and walked out of the large tent. Soon after, everyone followed him out. Once they were out of the tent, the air became a lot fresher. Yang Chendong took a deep breath and said, "Is Pingle General He Shang here?" "This general is here." When his name was called, He Shang was first stunned. Then, he responded and walked toward Yang Chendong. Seeing that He Shang was called, the other officials had a puzzled expression on their faces. It must be said that He Shang was a special case among all the Guangdong generals. This person wasn't corrupt and didn't fit in with the crowd. What he liked to do the most was to train soldiers. In everyone's eyes, He Shang was an unusual existence. They really couldn't think of anything. Could it be that this kind of person had fallen into the hands of the Imperial envoy? If that was the case, then would there be anyone here who was innocent? While everyone was puzzled, they saw He Shang walking to Yang Chendong's side in the distance. Then, the two of them exchanged a few words. After that, this Peace Joy Mansion's general left in high spirits. Nothing happened? Everyone looked at each other. Only then did they realize that this was the Imperial envoy arranging military affairs. After understanding this point, everyone was even more puzzled. What did this mean? Why did he arrange the military affairs behind their backs? Could it be that he didn't believe in their loyalty to the Southern Ming Empire? Of course, these thoughts were only in their hearts. If there was anyone who dared to stand out and criticize Yang Chendong, they would have already lost their courage. On the other side, after He Shang was called away, Shao Province's General Yu Guang was also called over. Then he nodded and quickly left the place. After taking their seats, Yang Chendong turned around and looked at everyone with a smile. "I'm sure everyone must be hungry after being busy. Lord Lu, have you prepared something to eat?" It's ready. Everything has been arranged in Guangzhou City. Imperial Envoy, please go ahead." Seeing that the official business was finally over, Lu Youfu couldn't help but feel relieved. He responded with a smile. Chapter 359. Good. Since that is the case, let's enter the city. Yang Chendong waved his hand. Immediately, everyone entered Guangzhou City in a grandiose manner. The news of Yang Chendong killing Jia Ping and severely punishing Han Qing quickly spread throughout the city and the army. When some of the commoners and soldiers heard this news, they were all overjoyed. Not to mention the skill of this young imperial envoy in battle, at least his ability to govern was not bad. The commoners were like this. As long as someone punished a corrupt official, they would be happy. As for whether or not they would be able to gain anything because of this, that was not something they cared about. Lu Youfu gave Yang Chendong a very good residence in Guangzhou City to live in. Naturally, Yang Chendong would not refuse such good intentions. At the same time he gladly accepted, he had his wife, Hu Yan, and the others move in as well. Not only that, but he also had the back garden tidy up. Then, he had the third wife, Lady Shui, invite the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, Suma Nair, to liven things up. Finally, she could see Yang Chendong's face. Although she was invited over as an entertainer, the servant girl, Xiao Yun, also had many objections. However, as the main character, Suma Nair, was not angry at all. In her opinion, being able to come into contact with Yang Chendong was the first step to success. As for how it was done, that was not the most important thing. Moreover, the moment she entered the city, she had heard about Yang Chendong's actions in the large tent. She was very curious. Was this imperial envoy, who had openly bribed someone, not afraid that the matter would reach the emperor and he would be punished? Where did he have the confidence to do such a thing? With all kinds of questions in her mind, Sumaner appeared in the back garden in a long white dress. As soon as Sumaner appeared, she gave people a very stunning feeling. Dressed in white, she appeared incomparably holy. If one did not know that this person had once been a courtesan by the Qinhuai River, one would not have thought that this person came from such a place. On the contrary, judging from her attire and behavior, it would be more accurate to call her a lady from a respectable family. Yang Chendong's eyes narrowed when he saw Sumaner's outfit. Then, he slowly leaned against the rattan chair and closed his eyes while Hu Yan and Madame Shui hugged him. Occasionally, he would open his mouth and enjoy the peeled fruits that Hu Yan and Madame Shui put in his mouth. Strictly speaking, Yang Chendong's actions were somewhat disrespectful. However, as if she was used to such things, or perhaps she was already mentally prepared, Sumaner was not angry. Instead, she gently tested the pipa in her hand and began to play. She was singing the song, Wishing We Last Forever, by Yang Chendong. It had to be said that the sound coming from Sumaner's mouth was indeed different. Even Madame Shui, who was good at this, kept nodding after hearing it. It was obvious that she approved of Sumaner's playing skills. Yang Chendong sat on the rattan chair with his head slightly tilted back. The corners of his mouth curled into a gentle smile. His right hand tapped gently on the armrest of the rattan chair as if he was immersed in it. He was in a good mood. Yang Chendong was in a good mood. Hu Yan and Madame Shui, who were sitting beside him, also looked happy. Even Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing not far behind, looked happy. In these people's hearts, Yang Chendong's happiness was their happiness, and Yang Chendong's happiness was their happiness. This was a powerful personality charm that could affect the mood of others at any time and place. This warm and wonderful scene lasted for more than an hour, and then everything was ruined by the sounds of fighting and shouting outside. Out of instinct, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei came to Yang Chendong's side to protect him. In addition, Tai Qingyi, who was standing not far away, also stood in front of Hu Yan and Madame Shui. There were 6 other women standing with her. From the determination in their eyes, it could be seen that they were not afraid of death. This sudden change made Sumaner, who was singing, shut her mouth naturally. When she saw that Hu Yan and Madame Shui were protected by people, and only her maid Xiao Yun came to her side, she did not know why, but there was a faint jealousy in her heart. At this moment, the sounds of fighting outside had stopped. Then came the shout of General Guan Ying. "I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. Let me go." Obviously, the person who came should be Guan Ying. He probably took things too hard because of what happened in the big tent in the morning and wanted to see Yang Chendong. However, Yang Chendong, who was in a relaxed state, could not be disturbed by just anyone. He was blocked outside the door as usual. In a moment of anger, he wanted to break in. "Let him in." Yang Chendong, who was sitting on the rattan chair, looked calm. It was not clear whether he was really angry, but there was a sense of coldness in his voice. As the voice rang out, there were footsteps in the outer courtyard. Then Guan Ying, whose face was slightly red and swollen, walked in under the escort of 4 Lung Feng. To be able to have 4 Lung Feng following him, it was clear that Guan Ying's skills were not bad. Looking at the Lung Feng who followed him, it seemed that their clothes were also disheveled. It was clear that the fight just now had been very fierce. Yang Chendong's gaze swept over the 5 people. Then, his voice was still indifferent as he asked, "You want to see me?" "That's right, I want to see you. I want to ask you why you did what you did during the day. Also, what were those generals sent out to do? You have to give me an explanation." Guan Ying glared and shouted, as if he was very angry. Guan Ying's shout entered his ears clearly. Sitting there, Yang Chendong first frowned slightly. His gaze swept over Guan Ying's body again and again. Then, his smile seemed to be forcefully wiped away by an invisible hand. His expression suddenly became much more serious. "Who do you think you are? Do you think I am someone you can see whenever you want to? What I want to do, is it something you can question? You still have an explanation? Let me tell you, even the Emperor of the Southern Ming Empire would not order me like this. Since you want an explanation, then I'll give you one. Beta Persei, beat him." Yang Chendong's sudden anger scared Guan Ying. All this time, Although Yang Qindong's actions were unpredictable, his attitude towards him could be considered friendly. At least, he didn't get angry at him, to the point that he forgot his identity. Now that he was suddenly reprimanded by Yang Qindong, he realized that he was just a small character. The reason why he didn't do anything to him was because he didn't put him in his eyes and didn't treat him as a dish. Now that he suddenly appeared and disturbed the other party's happy mood, was he going to punish him? As he thought this, he raised his head again and saw the tall Beta Persei walking towards him. Suddenly, anger flashed in his eyes. Guan Ying had been in the army and his performance was excellent. His skills were also better than ordinary people. This time, when he followed Kuangya Minister to inspect the various guards, he was more often than not a guard. From this it could be seen that his skills were quite good. This was also the reason why he dared to charge in alone. But just now, the 4 people he didn't put in his eyes taught him how to be a person. If it was a one-on-one, he was confident that none of the 4 would be a match for him. But in a group fight, the 4 people cooperated very well and he quickly fell into a disadvantage, to the point that he was pressed to the ground. This was already quite embarrassing. Now, Yang Qindong only sent 1 person. Although he was tall, this didn't mean anything. Sometimes, a tall and strong person didn't necessarily win in a fight. Strength didn't mean everything. Flexibility and timely exertion of strength were more important. Good. If it's a one-on-one, if I win, can I sit down and have a good talk with the Duke? Seeing that Beta Persei was already in front of him, Guan knew that he had to fight, so he asked Yang Qindong loudly. Ha ha ha. Guan Ying's shout attracted a burst of laughter from the surrounding people. This laughter was like a slap to Guan Ying's face, making him feel humiliated. You're going too far. Guan Ying didn't get a reply from Yang Qindong and was instead ridiculed by the crowd. In his anger, he immediately stomped on the ground and flew up. Then with a step in the air, he kicked at Beta Persei's head. This kick was fast and accurate. If Beta Persei was really stepped on, he would probably fall to the ground. Without resting for a month, he would never be able to recover. Seeing this kick land, Su Maner, who was watching this scene, couldn't help but cover her mouth with her white fingers. From the looks of it, she was quite frightened. The servant girl, Xiao Yun, was much worse than Su Maner. She had already opened her mouth and started screaming. Amidst such screams, Beta Persei's 2 arms, which were as strong as a woman's calves, suddenly stretched out and grabbed at Guan Ying's legs. Everyone said that an arm couldn't win against a leg. From this it could be seen that in terms of strength, arms and legs were not equal. However, this saying didn't seem to be practical when applied to Beta Persei. When the pair of arms stretched out to grab, the pair of legs, which should have been invincible, seemed to have been stopped in time. They were grabbed by something and fell into Beta Persei's hands. Then, they were restrained and couldn't move. When the pair of arms reached out, they accurately grabbed a pair of ankles. The pair of legs, which were wearing high-waisted cloth shoes, fell into Beta Persei's hands like a toy. When his attack succeeded, he laughed mischievously. Then, he forcefully twisted his waist and drew a circle with his feet as the center. Then, the pair of large hands in front of his arms suddenly loosened. Like flying a kite, he threw the owner of the pair of feet, Guan Ying, away. Guan Ying's kick was originally thought to be able to hurt Beta Persei. He was still thinking that the martial arts of the people around the Duke of Loyalty were only a so-so when he was shocked to find that he couldn't move. Then, the whistling sound of the wind rang in his ears and he was thrown away. Chapter 360. Out of instinct, Guan Ying tried his best to find a direction and a safe way to land. Therefore, when his body landed, he rolled on the ground awkwardly. Then, he got up from the ground with dust all over his body and squatted on the ground. Everything just happened too quickly. Even with Guan Ying's ability, he did not have the time to fully accept and digest it. However, just when he was still feeling a little dizzy, a large foot kicked him in the same way as he did to himself. Guan Ying only saw a black shadow in front of him, and a pair of big feet came towards him. Out of instinct, he raised his arms to block. Bang! A powerful force suddenly hit him. With just one blow, Guan Ying felt as if his arms had fallen apart. His whole body was also pushed back by the huge force. During this process, even though his feet forcefully rubbed against the ground in an attempt to stop, the force was too great. Even the soles of his high-waisted cloth shoes were worn out, revealing the soles of his feet. His body still flew back 4 to 5 meters before coming to a stop. Just as his body stopped, the black shadow rushed over again. This was Beta Persei's hot pursuit. As Yang Qindong once said, "Take advantage of the enemy's weakness, take the enemy's life. Kindness to the enemy is cruelty to oneself." He had gained the upper hand with one move, and followed up with another attack. A pair of strong thick arms had already reached over, and his fists turned into palms. He grabbed Guan Ying's body, which was still in shock and dizzy. After 2 consecutive blows, Guan Ying had lost his previous accurate judgment, so Beta Persei easily grabbed his arms and lifted him up. When his body suddenly leaned back, Guan Ying's body was thrown into a backflip by the inertia. This backward somersault was completely unexpected, and it was not what Guan Ying wanted either. This blow caused his body to come into close contact with the ground. The moment he was bombarded to the ground, he only felt that his eyes were dazed, and his whole body was in discomfort as if it had fallen apart. Thanks to his usual training, his physical fitness was not bad. However, if it was anyone else, just this strike alone would have been enough to take their life. Even so, Guan Ying was completely stunned by the fall. He had no idea that his opponent, Beta Persei, had already gotten up and lifted a large foot to stomp on his waist. A person's waist was flexible, but at the same time, it was also very fragile. Once the 200 kilograms Beta Persei stepped on it, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if they didn't lose their lives, they wouldn't be able to stand up for the rest of their lives. Fortunately, at this moment, Yang Qindong's voice suddenly rang out. "All right, stop." As soon as this voice rang out, Yang Er, who had a ferocious expression on his face and was about to land his foot on the ground, suddenly froze. He stood there motionless, as if he was one of the 7 fairies who had been immobilized by Sun Wukong. After maintaining this posture for about a breath of time, the big foot moved to the side and came into close contact with the ground again. A short battle ended just like that. From the beginning to the end, Guan Ying was the first to take the initiative to attack. The rest of the time, he was on the defensive, and even took a beating. From this, it could be seen that the difference in strength between the two was huge. No one went to help Guan Ying up. They just let him lie on the ground and gasp for breath, his chest rising and falling one after another. This was the consequence of offending the 6th young master. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong's order, he would have lost his life by now. As time passed, no one spoke in the entire back garden, as if they were waiting for something. After about 10 breaths of time, Guan Ying finally moved. He struggled to sit up, and then slowly stood up with his arms supporting his body. However, at this moment, no matter how one looked at it, his body was somewhat bent, and it seemed that he had suffered some minor injuries. Standing up, Guan Ying turned to look at Yang Qindong. There was incomparable anger in his eyes, but also pity and sorrow. He couldn't beat him in a fight, and he couldn't talk through it. Regardless of whether it was wealth, power, status or skill, the two sides were not on the same level. This made him feel a sense of inferiority. He finally realized that the mission Xianxia minister had given him was not going to be so easy to complete. "You're not dead yet, right? If you're not dead, then stand there and listen to me. Didn't you want me to give you an explanation? Then I'll tell you right now, I am the Imperial envoy, and it was your minister Xianxia who begged me to come. Since I am the general at the front, I naturally know what to do. I don't need anyone to teach me. Do you understand?" Looking straight at Guan Ying, Yang Qindong's voice rang out in the courtyard. Yang Qindong was emphasizing his identity. Hearing this, Guan Ying instinctively nodded. Naturally, he knew these things. He also knew that as the Imperial envoy and the general at the front personally appointed by the Emperor, he did indeed have the power to do anything. He was angry that the other party didn't tell him what he was going to do and didn't discuss the matter of sending out the army. This made him feel a sense of inferiority. Guan Ying nodded. Yang Qindong continued, "It's good that you know these things. As for killing Jia Ping, as Zhaoqing general, he led the escape and caused the morale of the army to be in chaos. Tens of thousands of civilians were trapped in the city and killed by the bandits. Shouldn't he be killed for his actions?" Han Qing, as an important official of the country, actually accepted bribes. It shouldn't be a problem to heavily punish him. The Emperor has said that we can take the money for the mercenaries ourselves. This is just one way of taking it. Wanting the horse to run but not giving the horse grass, this is not something I can do. As for the matter of moving the army, this is a secret. If I publicly announce the plan, can you guarantee that the military plan will not be leaked? Will it not be known by the bandits? You should wake up. I have my own plans for what to do. As for whether you can understand or not, this is not my problem. It is your problem. If it must be said, it is you who is cooperating with me and not me who is cooperating with you. When you encounter a problem, it is best if you can think it through. If you can't, then think hard. If you can't think it through, you can go back to Nanjing and be an official of the Ministry of War. That will save you the trouble of worrying here. Yang Chendong's voice carried some severity. Those familiar with Yang Chendong knew that if he could be strict with you, it meant that he still thought highly of you. On the other hand, if he didn't even want you to do it, then he was truly giving up on you. That was the most fatal thing. After saying this to Han Qing, Yang Chendong waved his hand. He didn't care whether the other party understood or not. He said loudly, "Okay, today is the first time you barged in like this, and it will also be the last time. But if something like this happens again, I will take your life. You can leave now. I still want to listen to music. Don't disturb my mood." After saying this, Yang Chendong leaned his body against the rattan chair and then slowly closed his eyes. Madame Shui, who was sitting beside Yang Chendong, saw her husband's behavior and couldn't help but smile. She then looked at Su Maner, who was still in shock, and said, "Miss Su, please continue." Su Maner replied mechanically. Then, she readjusted her state of mind. After that, a pleasant voice came out from her mouth and entered Yang Chendong's ears, causing his expression to become one of enjoyment and joy once again. Amidst such a beautiful voice, Guanyin dragged his injured body out of the back garden. Yang Chendong had finally given him an explanation. From the other party's words, he didn't seem to have gone overboard. As an imperial envoy, he had appeared in the unfamiliar environment of Guangdong. If he couldn't break through with his first 3 strikes, how could he make others listen to him? Looking at it now, he had done it. Now, speaking of the imperial envoy, from Lu Youfu to the insignificant officials who had seen this scene, all of them felt their hearts tremble. This made everyone pay extra attention to his orders. Wasn't this what Guanyin himself had hoped to see before? He thought that perhaps this was the method of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Now that the move had been used, it was up to whether or not he could really quell the rebels. In the rebel camp. In the government office of the former Zhaoqing Manor, Huang Yuliang was gathering his generals for a so-called military meeting. Ever since Yingzong was defeated at Tumu Fortress 2 years ago and lost 500,000 elite soldiers, the powerful Great Ming dynasty began to decline. Zhu Qizhen, who had retreated to Nanjing, established the capital here and established the Southern Ming dynasty. In order to fill the national treasury, the Southern Ming dynasty added a lot of excessive taxes. When it fell on the commoners, it was unspeakably bitter and the people had no way to make a living. It was under such circumstances that Huang Shaoyang brought a group of brothers to start a peasant uprising in Guangdong. At the beginning of the uprising, they received the support of many poor commoners. The group expanded and took over a few counties, reaching a certain scale. At the same time, they were suppressed by the Southern Ming dynasty. When faced with the Ming army coming from all directions, the unorganized peasant group was quickly calmed down. In the end, Huang Shaoyang and his eldest son were both killed. Only his second son, Huang Yuliang, was left to escape and continue to fight against the Ming army on a small scale in Guangdong. There was constant encirclement and suppression. In such an environment, the space left for Huang Yuliang to survive became smaller and smaller. Just as he was about to be trapped, surrounded, and even destroyed, the Ming army that had surrounded him suddenly retreated by more than half. This sudden change made Huang Yuliang feel a sense of confusion. However, he immediately received news that the king of Min Zhuang, Zhu Huixin, was rebelling in Yunnan. Not long after, he received a personal letter from the king of Min Zhuang. The general idea was that he was willing to ally with him. They would help each other and work together. Chapter 361. Zhu Huihua's appearance messed up the situation and gave Huang Yuliang a chance to catch his breath. Using this chance, he finally stabilized his footing. The initial defense turned into a timely counterattack, and now the siege of the city. His army had expanded to 150,000 people, and the number of citizens under his rule had reached close to 1 million. In Zhaoqing Manor, After a round of fighting, smashing, looting and burning, the place was in a mess. Even sitting in the manor, one could still smell the smell of burning houses in the air. Huang Yuliang sat on the main seat and casually glanced at his subordinates. He lightly knocked on the desk in front of him, and the noisy hall instantly quieted down. Everyone, we have conquered Zhaoqing. Our forces have expanded by another step. This is something worth celebrating. It is enough to prove that the Southern Ming Empire is rotten, and they are no match for us. Ha ha! These encouraging words made everyone in the hall burst into laughter. Almost all of them had arrogant looks on their faces at this moment. It was as if the world would soon be under their control. Huang Yuliang also laughed along with everyone, but he quickly stopped laughing. But Zhaoqing Manor is not our target. According to the plan discussed with Zhu Huihua, we need to conquer the Guangzhou Manor, and even the entire Guangdong province. Only then can we better suppress the Southern Ming Empire's military strength, make our name known, and expand our forces. So, we need to keep advancing and advancing. Yes, we cannot be satisfied. There are more wealth and beauties waiting for us. We need to continue attacking. Geng Jun, the leader of the 4 heavenly kings and the only one who followed young Master Huang to Zhaoqing Manor, stood up and agreed with Huang Yuliang. Well said. Heavenly King Geng's words are our next target. Reality has proven that the so-called Southern Ming Empire's army cannot withstand a single blow. But Huang Yuliang's voice trailed off. When everyone heard the word, but, they could not help but perk up their ears. They knew that was the main point of today's meeting. However, there's a piece of bad news. Emperor Yingzong of the Ming dynasty sent an imperial envoy to Guangzhou Prefecture. He's currently mobilizing troops and preparing to come to Guangzhou Prefecture. It seems like he intends to have a decisive battle with us. Huang Yuliang didn't let everyone wait for a long time. After keeping everyone in suspense, he told them the rest of the story. After saying this, he intentionally shrugged his shoulders. All right, I heard that the imperial envoy is the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty. Oh, he's only 21 years old this year. Whew! As Huang Yuliang finished his last sentence, there was a burst of exhalation in the hall. Originally, when they heard that the Southern Ming Empire had sent a large army and an imperial envoy to fight with them, they were still a little nervous. No matter what, the Ming army's combat power was still very strong. In addition, the Ming army was very strong. If they really gathered their strength to counterattack, they would have to retreat. However, when they heard that the imperial envoy was a young man who was only 21 years old, they all laughed. Their faces, which had just become tense, completely relaxed at this moment. As for the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty, these people naturally ignored him. Perhaps in their eyes, the so-called nobility of the Ming dynasty was just someone who had a good life and came from a good family. They definitely wouldn't believe that such a person would have any ability. These people would overlook Yang Qindong and the Duke of Loyalty. Naturally, it was because of the lack of information. News was not smooth, public opinion was not developed, and Yang Qindong was only known around the capital of Beiming. In addition, Emperor Yingzong, Zhu Qizhen, intentionally downplayed this person's name. Yang Qindong's name was indeed not well known in the south. Without anyone knowing, these people naturally judged people based on their first impression of him. He was only a 21-year-old young man. How could he be in the eyes of these generals who relied on their own hard work to obtain results? Everyone had an indifferent expression, and Huang Yuliang also laughed along. He himself also didn't know much about Yang Qindong. Or rather, he didn't want to know. He was only a young man in his early 20s, so he didn't put him in his eyes. If it wasn't to motivate his subordinates, he probably wouldn't even mention a word about the 6th young master. Good brothers. The Southern Ming dynasty has no one. They actually sent a little kid to lead the army. Do they really think we are made of mud? Since it's like this, let's show them our strength and let them know how powerful we are. Huang Yuliang laughed loudly, raising everyone's morale. Young master is right. Since the Southern Ming dynasty dares to look down on us, we should show them our strength. The generals all became excited. The successive victories had made them lose themselves. This time, they were facing a young man, so they underestimated the enemy even more. At this time, not only the generals of the bandit army, even young Master Huang Yuliang was very proud. Seeing everyone filled with righteous indignation, He felt that the morale of the army could be used, so he shouted loudly. Good, since everyone has agreed, we will send troops to the Guangzhou Palace and capture the Ming Imperial envoy alive. Send troops to the Guangzhou Palace and capture the Ming Imperial envoy alive. The generals below followed Huang Yuliang's shout and shouted the slogan together. Their eyes were filled with longing and fantasy for a beautiful future. Under Huang Yuliang's call and strategy, the bandit army quickly gathered the rations they stole from various places and started to prepare to directly attack the Guangzhou Palace that had no obstacles in front of them. To them, if they took down this place, it was equivalent to taking over the entire Guangdong. When that time came, their influence would be even greater, and there would be even more heroes coming to join them. Guangzhou Palace. It had been 7 days since the last meeting in the big tent. In these 7 days, Yang Chendong refused to see anyone. Every day, he would listen to music and watch dances in the back garden of the palace. Even when Han Qing brought 400,000 liang of silver, it was his follower, Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for receiving it. When they arrived, it was like Mount Tai was pressing down on them. It gave people the feeling that the situation on the front line could not be delayed. Whoever dared to delay for even a moment would be killed. But after settling down, it was so quiet. It was as if the world was at peace and there was only pleasure and enjoyment left. This kind of contrast made many people unable to understand. However, due to the fact that Yang Chendong had killed Jia Ping and punished Han Qing, he was too ruthless. Although everyone couldn't figure it out, no one dared to ask. The entire situation seemed to have stopped here. Yang Chendong relied on the name of the Imperial envoy and his decisive actions last time to make everyone feel afraid. No one dared to disturb him. In comparison, the Guangdong political commissioner, Liu Youfu, and General Guaning did not receive such treatment. The palace they were temporarily staying in was filled with people and carriages every day. Many people came to ask about how to deal with the upcoming battle. As the Guangdong political commissioner, Liu Youfu was more worried about the situation in Guangdong than anyone else. After all, if there was a big problem here, he would certainly be at fault. He had originally been shocked by Yang Chendong's methods when he first arrived. He thought that with such an imperial envoy, the Guangdong matter should not be difficult to resolve. But after 7 days, there was suddenly no movement, and he couldn't sit still any longer. Until one day, he suddenly received a battle report saying that Huang Yuliang's bandit army had already set out from Zhaoqing Palace. When the army's vanguard headed straight for the Guangzhou Palace, he could not sit still no matter what. Men, prepare horses. We are going to General Guan's palace. In General Guan's palace, Guan Ying was writing a battle report in his study. The so-called battle report was Guan Ying's daily report of the battle on the front line to the southern Ming court. If there was a battle and there were results, it could be reported twice a day, or even thrice a day. But now, even if it was a battle report a day, Guan Ying did not know how to write it. Speaking of which, Guan Ying was slightly different from normal generals in the army. He had studied before and had even become a Xiaotsai. It was only because he had no hope of becoming a Xiaotsai that he changed careers and joined the army. Because of his quick thinking and outstanding performance, he was recognized by Kuang Yi and was transferred into the military. It was not difficult for a Xiaotsai to write a battle report. But now, the same thing in his eyes was giving him a headache. He didn't want the emperor and minister Xie to worry, but he couldn't go against his will and report the war. Helpless, Guan Ying painfully wrote on the white paper that today was peaceful, the 3 armies didn't move, and everything was as usual. After writing this, he called for a personal attendant and had him report it to the relay station. After sitting down, Guan Ying stood in front of the window and moved his waist, which had not fully recovered from the injury. 7 days ago, after being taught a lesson by Beta Persei, he endured the pain in his waist and returned to the palace. Then, he lay in bed for 3 days. Even the battle report was written on the bed. After 3 days, he could get out of bed and walk. He had been looking forward to Yang Chendong's next move. But after waiting for another 4 days, there was still no movement. Gradually, his heart, which had been calmed by Yang Chendong's words, became restless again. Standing in front of the window and thinking about what Yang Chendong had said to him, Guan Ying's expression became more and more confused. He admitted that after being taught a lesson that day, Yang Chendong's words were not wrong. Since it was a military secret, the more confidential it was, the better. After all, Guangdong had lost 5 major cities in a row. If one were to say that there were no bandit spies in the government, even he himself would not believe it. Chapter 362. However, if it was just to prevent spies from eavesdropping on military intelligence, would he still be able to win this battle if he didn't move? Could it be that Yang Chendong came here just for fun? Or did he really have a card up his sleeve and already made all kinds of arrangements? When he thought about how the great Ming dynasty's army, other than the Canton 1,000 guards brought by Liu Youfu, who was still in Guangzhou, the rest of the great Ming dynasty's army had been sent out, and many of the mercenaries had also been sent out, he felt a little relieved. Perhaps this Duke of Loyalty had already made arrangements. Guan Ying was still comforting himself. He thought that since Yang Chendong was able to stay so calmly in Guangzhou, he must have made some preparations. Just as he was thinking, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the study. Then an attendant's voice sounded. "General Liu Youfu is here. He said he has important military intelligence and must see you." Important military intelligence? Hearing this, Guan Ying's expression became tense. "Okay, I'll go over right now." In the main hall of the Guan residence, Guan Ying saw Liu Youfu, who was burning with anxiety. "Liu Youfu, why are you so anxious? Has Lady Jia's 500,000 taels of silver arrived?" The reason why Guan Ying brought up the matter of the 500,000 taels of silver was because the Imperial envoy's manor had let out word that when Jia's silver arrived, he would only receive guests. Otherwise, even if the sky fell, he was not to be disturbed. Guan Ying naturally didn't believe this statement. Once there was a military emergency, if Yang Chendong still didn't do anything, it would be a major dereliction of duty. At that time, his position as Imperial envoy would be removed. Not only that, but the Emperor and Minister Kuang probably wouldn't let him off easily. However, even though he knew that this was just an excuse, Guan Ying still hoped that this matter could be settled as soon as possible. After all, once the matter was settled, Yang Chendong would have no reason to refuse to see them. He could also fulfill his duty and urge them to hurry up. "General Guan, it's not that Lady Jia's silver has arrived. I've already urged them there." Instead, news came from Zhaoqing residence. The bandit leader Huang Yuliang has already brought 80,000 soldiers to the Guangzhou residence. The situation is critical, Liu Youfu said with an anxious expression. "There's such a thing? When did it happen?" This was the first time Guan Ying had heard of such a thing. He couldn't help but ask with some doubt. "It can't be wrong. This was sent back by the spies I've planted among the bandits. I'm sure the official report will be sent over soon," Liu Youfu said firmly. Since the rebels were able to plant informants in the government, Liu Youfu, as the Guangdong political commissioner, planting an informant in the other party was a reasonable matter. Guan Ying no longer doubted this point. Instead, he nodded. "This is an important matter. How about this? I will have to trouble Sir Liu to go with me to see the Imperial envoy." Of course. Liu Youfu nodded. This time, he came to persuade Guan Ying to meet Yang Chendong with him. 7 days ago, General Guan had barged into the residence of the Imperial envoy and was subsequently beaten. He had long heard the news. Guan Ying was Minister Kuang Ye's favorite. If Yang Chendong could beat up such a person, he really didn't have the guts to break into the mansion. Guan Ying agreed. After having a companion, Liu Youfu also had some confidence. Immediately, the two of them left the manor together and headed straight for Yang Chendong's residence. The two of them, one on a horse and one in a sedan, quickly arrived outside the temporary Yang Manor in the city. However, without any surprise, they were met with a closed door. Yang Wu, who was guarding the door, stopped the two of them. When he heard them say that they had important battle reports to report, he shook his head. "Sirs, I am truly sorry. You know the Duke's temper. Since he said that before Jia's silver is delivered, no one is allowed to come and disturb him. Even if the sky falls, he won't see you. Brother, please report. This is indeed an urgent military situation. If something happens, I'm afraid you won't be able to take responsibility." Liu Youfu saw that even a doorman could stop him. He was unhappy in his heart and spoke with a threatening tone. "There's nothing I can't take responsibility for. Since the Duke asked me to guard the door, I must abide by the rules set. Please return." Yang Wu was not angry at Liu Youfu's words. On the contrary, he said this with a smile on his face. However, this smile at this moment seemed to be asking for a beating. Lu Youfu didn't have any good ideas. He could only look at Guan Ying for help, hoping that he would speak up. If it really didn't work, he would try to break in. However, Guan Ying's performance was truly disappointing. Seeing that Yang Wu was blocking him, he simply turned around and left. Only then did his voice travel out. "All right, if possible, please inform the Imperial envoy that the Jia silver will arrive very soon. However, the front line is indeed in a state of emergency. If something really happens to the Guangzhou prefecture, I'm afraid no one will be able to bear such a responsibility. Take care, I won't see you out." Yang Wu acted as if he didn't hear Guan Ying's words and was still smiling. Then, his gaze fell on Lu Youfu and pretended to be puzzled. It was as if he was asking, "What's wrong? Is this lord not leaving?" Humph. Lu Youfu saw the meaning in Yang Wu's eyes and left angrily with a flick of his sleeve. No matter what, he was still Guangdong's chief political envoy, a second-grade official in the imperial court, and an existence similar to that of a feudal official. Who would normally dare to give him such a look? However, considering that Yang Chendong's methods were a little too rough, he didn't have the guts to barge in. He could only resentfully chase after Guan Ying, who was about to leave. "General Guan, are we not going to report this matter to the Imperial envoy?" "Don't report it first. Let's think of a way to send Jia Shi's silver over first." Guan Ying lightly shook his head. Then, he turned around to look at the Yang manor and left. He had already decided that when he returned, he would write a battle report against Yang Chendong. Inside the Yang manor. After Yang Wu sent off Guan Ying and Lu Youfu, he came here. When he saw Yang Chendong, he reported everything that happened outside. "Good, I got it. You did well." Yang Chendong first smiled and then said with satisfaction. After Yang Wu left happily, he looked at Yang San, who was in the study, and said, "It seems that they also arranged spies among the bandits. The news is actually not much later than ours." "Yes, it should be Lu Youfu's doing. It seems that this person is not muddle-headed." Yang San nodded in agreement. Just 2 hours ago, he had already received a report from his spies among the bandits and immediately reported it to Yang Chendong. This was also why Yang Chendong dared to refuse Lu Youfu and Guan Ying's visit, even though he knew that they had a military report. It's just that they are not muddle-headed. They have limited military strength and limited military resources. Even if they want to do something, there are inevitably too many people holding them back. In the end, it's still difficult to stretch out their hands and feet. Yang Chendong commented on Lu Youfu's weakness, or it could be said that it was the weakness of the entire southern Ming dynasty. No one would believe that the dignified great Ming dynasty did not have any talents. It was just that because of the restrictions of the environment, it was difficult for people with abilities to stretch out their hands and feet. It was just like how if a young person did not experience some hardships and enough experience, how could they be entrusted with important tasks? When they really made a name for themselves, they would probably already be an old person. At that time, the edges of struggle would have been smoothed out, and their will would not be as high. They would naturally learn the principle of subservience. When a young person wanted to stand out, they would also habitually suppress them. This was a kind of cycle. In this way, each generation was worse than the previous. The dynasty would naturally decline more and more, and it would not be far from a change of dynasty. Seeing that the great Ming dynasty was going downhill from prosperity, Yang San, who was standing on the side, said carefully, "Young master, we found some unexpected circumstances regarding Miss Su's matter." "Unexpected circumstances? Tell me." Yang Chendong's interest was piqued. He had always been curious about why Su Maner would appear by his side. Since she was the #1 courtesan by the Qinhuai River, she naturally did not lack money. If she was willing, it would not be difficult for her to marry into a noble or minister's family as a concubine. However, she just had to appear by his side and did not seem to want to leave. Why exactly was this? Through observation, Yang Chendong discovered that the other party did not worship him much. This could be felt from the first time they met. If it was not worship, it was even more illogical for him to act like this. This was why he ordered the Security Bureau to investigate this woman's background properly. He even emphasized that they had to start from her background and the people she came into contact with. "Yes." Yang San first nodded in agreement, then said in a very careful voice, Young master, according to your instructions, we first started from Miss Su's background. It was from there that we found out the difference. Although there were many rumors about her background, we finally found out that Miss Su actually came from an official's family. Her grandfather was once the left assistant minister of the Nanjing 6th Ministry of Rites. His surname was Su and his name was Cheng. He was extremely talented. Su Cheng? Recalling this name in his mind, Yang Chendong nodded. That's right. I know this person, Su Cheng. He is indeed talented. He was even praised by Zhu Di, the founder of the Ming dynasty. That's right. We also found out that this Su Cheng originally wanted to be transferred from Nanjing to Beijing to be an official. However, perhaps because his performance was too stunning, not long after, he was found guilty of bribery and corruption. Not long after, he died in prison. Then, his family was sent away. Miss Su was in this family. However, her luck was not bad. At that time, she was not in the Su residence but in the countryside. Thus, she avoided disaster. That's right, the person who accused Su Cheng at that time was the current Minister of Rites of the Southern Ming Dynasty, Lu Da. Lu Da? Interesting. When he heard this, Yang Chendong's lips curled into a smile. Chapter 363. That's all we found out for now. After all, Lu Da is now the Minister of Rites. He has a high position and is not easy to investigate. Our people will make the best use of the time. Young master, please wait for a while. Seeing that Yang Chendong was satisfied, Yang Sen heaved a sigh of relief. Although Yang Chendong did not mention Su Maner's matter, he definitely placed great importance on it. Otherwise, this girl would not have been able to stay in the Yang residence. This also put a lot of pressure on Yang San. However, when the matter reached Lu Da, it stopped. Firstly, it was because the other party had a lot of power. If they were not careful, they might be targeted. Secondly, it had been so many years. Many things had changed. It would be very difficult to investigate. The two difficulties were very small. Only then did Yang San feel a huge increase in pressure. This matter is indeed not easy to investigate. However, it still needs to be investigated as soon as possible. How about this? Give 100,000 taels of silver to the Nanjing branch and let them get to the bottom of this matter. Yang Chendong understood Yang San's difficulty. However, the Security Bureau was supposed to do things that others could not do. As long as the investment was huge, it was believed that anything could be uncovered. Not to mention, Su Cheng was the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. That was a third-rank official. It was not something that could be done with just one or two people working together. As long as they put in the effort, they should be able to find some clues. Adding on 100,000 taels of silver, it was enough to see how important this matter was to Yang Chendong. Yang San nodded heavily. Young master, don't worry. I will arrange it now and strive for an early result. Guan Ying and Lu Youfu returned after hitting a wall. After the two of them discussed, they decided to take a roundabout approach. They thought of a way to settle the Jia family's matter first. This way, Yang Chendong would not be able to find an excuse to not meet them. Lu Youfu was anxious. He gave the order and naturally had his trusted subordinates to handle this matter. In order to protect themselves, the Jia family did not have the protection of an official like Jia Ping. When Lu Youfu's pressure came, they could only be at his mercy. Speaking of which, the Jia family in Guangdong was considered a large family, but their main focus was on business. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants had never been high. They were like a piece of fat meat that anyone with power could take a bite out of at any time. They clearly saw this weakness, so they worked hard to cultivate talents. That was why they had Jia Ping as a general. Although he was only a fourth-grade military officer, he was still considered a member of the bureaucracy. When he did some things, he had some confidence. Unfortunately, this confidence was destroyed by Yang Chendong's appearance as an example to others. After the Jia clan lost their backing and Lu Youfu's pressure, they quickly gave in. The 500,000 taels of silver were delivered to Gan province in just 5 days. When the silver finally arrived, Lu Youfu excitedly called Guan Ying to go with him to the Yang residence. They wanted to see what excuse the Imperial envoy would have to not see them this time. To their surprise, when they appeared in front of the Yang mansion with their personal attendants, Yang Wu, who they had seen last time, had a beaming smile on his face. He even opened the mansion's doors wide and welcomed them warmly. Humph! Seeing this reality, Lu Youfu couldn't help but lightly snort. Then, he and Guan Ying walked into the Yang residence and arrived at the main hall. Not long after, Yang Qindong walked in under the protection of Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. As soon as he entered, he smiled and cupped his hands. One tael of silver is not bad. This matter has truly been hard on the two of you. Yang Qindong had once served as the Northern Ming's general of Agile Cavalry, which was a second-rank military official position. He himself was also a loyal duke of the Great Ming. In addition, he was currently serving as an imperial envoy. When he was this polite, the two people had no choice but to promptly stand up and cup their fists to return the greeting. Imperial envoy Darren is too polite. Please take a seat. Please take a seat. Alas, when it comes to silver, this imperial envoy is also very helpless. I'm afraid you also know that this time, we came to Guangdong on the emperor's orders to quell the rebellion. The national treasury did not give us a single tael of silver. It said that before the three armies move, the provisions move first. What should this imperial envoy do? Fortunately, Qiao Shongshu was there to help. After reporting to the emperor, the imperial edict allowed them to raise their own silver taels. Moreover, he also said that anything related to the rebel army could be taken away as well. Haha, this was indeed the emperor's boundless benevolence, showing compassion for the people of our generation. Although Jia Ping is a general of the Great Ming, he was defeated at the hands of the rebel army and lost a city. This can be considered a heinous crime. You two won't have any objections to taking 500,000 taels of silver from him, right? It seemed like an explanation, but in reality, Yang Qindong was using these words to tell Lu Youfu and Guan Ying that he had an imperial edict to follow for taking the silver. Even if they objected, they could not do anything. Furthermore, in the future, this kind of thing could happen at any time. When Lu Youfu and Guan Ying heard this, how could they not understand? In their hearts, they did not like Yang Qindong's greed. However, when they thought about the current crisis of the war, it was not the time to talk about this. As long as they could quell the rebels, what was wrong with letting him take advantage of them? Immediately, the two of them cupped their hands expressionlessly. They stood and said, Imperial Envoy Darren is joking. Since the Emperor has allowed it, we will do our best to cooperate. Good, haha good. With the two of you saying these words, this Imperial Envoy's heart can be at ease. Oh, that's right, the two of you probably didn't come just to give me silver, right? Is there anything else? Yang Qindong's face carried a smile, and his attitude became warmer as he spoke. Finally, they could talk about the main topic. Lu Youfu, who had been unable to restrain himself for a long time, stood up 3 times and cupped his hands to say, Imperial Envoy Darren, the Yellow Bandit Army has already moved from Zhaoqing Manor to Guangzhou Manor. Currently, they have surrounded the city and are attacking the city. The situation is truly critical. I ask Imperial Envoy Darren to quickly dispatch troops to relieve the siege of Guangzhou. That's right, Guangzhou Manor is in imminent danger. Does the Imperial Envoy have any plans to deal with it? Guan Ying also stood up and asked with a hidden meaning in his words. In regards to Yang Qindong's lack of action these days, Guan Ying had already reached his limit. In his opinion, this person who was rumored to have the military god's nickname did not have the ability to strategize like he thought. He only knew how to listen to music and watch dances every day. He completely had the image of a young master who enjoyed himself. He really couldn't understand why Huang Shongshu had chosen him in the beginning. Guangzhou Manor had already been surrounded for a few days. He wanted to see how this situation was resolved. If it couldn't be resolved, how could he explain it to his superiors? Lu Youfu was Guangdong's political envoy, and had just been appointed. He was worried about his position and future, so he spoke with a pleading tone. Guan Ying was the representative of the Ministry of War. He was more concerned about the overall situation. Therefore, he was somewhat disappointed with Yang Qindong. When he spoke, it was more of a questioning tone. When these two different attitudes were put pressure on Yang Chen, the atmosphere in the room became somewhat oppressive. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing behind him, were the first to react. They stared fiercely at the two people who were speaking with a pair of tiger eyes. Looking at them, it seemed that once Yang Qindong gave the order, they would fight. The atmosphere suddenly solidified, and Lu Youfu's heart became cold. He felt that Tiger's mane's gaze had been fixed on him, like a dormant poisonous snake. It seemed that at any time, he could jump up and attack him. He couldn't help but feel some regret. If he had known earlier, he would have brought 2 of his personal guards in. If he had truly angered the capricious Imperial envoy, at least he would have had room to maneuver. Guan Ying, on the other hand, felt Beta Persei's gaze fiercely staring at him, so he also glared back. Although they had already exchanged blows and he knew that he was not the other party's opponent, a soldier could be killed but not humiliated. This time, even if he was going to be killed here, he couldn't have the slightest timidity. He was an official of the Southern Ming Empire, and he was a general. How could he shrink back because of fear of the enemy? The 4 gazes were different. Because of these variables, there was an additional trace of murderous intent in the air. The entire room became extremely quiet because of this. All this until Yang Chendong spoke again. Oh, could it be that the city of Guangzhou has already been breached? Lu Youfu didn't know why Yang Chendong asked this, but out of truth, he still shook his head and said, "No, the commander of the Guangdong Guards, General Ma Wei, is currently leading troops to defend the city. It hasn't been breached yet." "Since it hasn't been breached, why are you so nervous?" Yang Chendong's sudden rhetorical question made it seem like he was stating something. This caused Lu Youfu to be stunned. Yes, the city hasn't been breached yet. Why are Guan Ying and I so pressuring? Guan Ying also became uneasy because of these words. Then, he suddenly thought of something. The original questioning in his eyes retreated a lot, and he asked in a consulting manner, "Please teach me, Imperial Envoy." "Teach you? There's nothing to teach. The truth is placed in front of us. Previously, when I sent Commander Ma Wei back to Guangzhou, I told him that once the yellow bandits attack the city, he must defend the city for 10 days. Once the time is up, he can abandon the city and leave. All of the responsibility will be on me. Presumably, it hasn't been 10 days yet." Yang Chendong looked at Guan Ying and spoke in a rhetorical manner. No, it's only been 4 days until today." Guan Ying reported the truth. "It's only been 4 days. So there are still 6 days. Yes, if we go straight from Guangzhou to Guangzhou, 6 days is enough. There's still time. How about this? Tonight the 2 of you will stay in the Yang Manor for a family feast. Tomorrow morning, our army will depart from here toward Guangzhou. How about that?" Yang Chendong's expression was full of confidence. It seemed like he was consulting, but it was more like he was informing. After saying this, he didn't wait for Lu Youfu and Guan Ying to reply. Instead, he turned to Tiger's mane behind him and said, "Go, inform the 2 madams to arrange a family feast. Also, inform Miss Su to prepare a song and dance. Tonight, I will be entertaining important guests." Chapter 364. In the face of a great enemy, no one would be in the mood to attend the banquet. However, considering that this was Yang Chendong's kindness, they could use this opportunity to ease the tension between the 2 sides. They could also test the other party's thoughts and preparations. After looking at each other, they cupped their fists and replied, "Then we will have to trouble the Imperial envoy." "Ah, no trouble, no trouble. Please be punctual for the banquet tonight. Now, you can go back and make the arrangements. Tomorrow morning, we will leave Guangzhou and depart for the Guangzhou prefecture." Yang Chendong laughed loudly as if the matter had already been resolved. No matter what, they could finally send out their troops. When Lu Youfu and Guan Ying left the Yang Manor, there was a hint of joy on their faces. However, when the 2 returned to the Guangzhou Yamen and prepared to mobilize the troops and make preparations for war, they sadly realized that they only had 1,000 guards to mobilize. In other words, they only had 1,000 soldiers that could go to war. Although there was 1,000 guards outside the Guangzhou prefecture that was responsible for security, they could still mobilize them with their identities. However, if they mobilized them, how would they deal with the Guangzhou prefecture when it was in danger? For a moment, the 2 could not help but worry. According to the battle report from the front lines, the Yellow Bandit Army had 80,000 men. This was not all of their military strength. There were also large armies causing trouble in other places. Although General Ma Wei was in the Guangzhou prefecture, there was a Guangdong Guard and 1,000 guards. With a total of 7,000 soldiers, it was already difficult to defend the city. It was impossible for them to go out of the city and counterattack. In this case, What could they do with 1,000 men in their hands? Feeling that they did not have enough military strength, Lu Youfu looked at Guan Ying, who was following beside him, and asked, General Guan, do you know where the soldiers from the Pingyue Prefecture and Shaozhou Prefecture went? I don't know. Guan Ying shook his head and said straightforwardly. He had asked Yang Chendong about this before and was dismissed with a casual sentence of military secrets. I don't know. This answer clearly made Lu Youfu unhappy. However, Guan Ying was sent by the Ministry of War. Although Guan Ying's position was not as high as his, he was not his subordinate. He could not casually reprimand him. Even if he had anger in his heart, he could not vent it. It seems that I can only ask the Imperial envoy during the banquet tonight. Sigh, it's impossible to do anything with just this 1,000 guards institute. Even if we throw them onto the battlefield, I'm afraid they won't be able to do anything. Lu Youfu could not be blamed for shaking his head. What he knew was that although the Yellow Bandits' combat power was average, they would not be a match for the Ming army even if they were to fight one-on-one. However, the difference between 1,000 and 80,000 was too great. He had no chance of winning at all. The two of them, who were originally in a good mood, thus dissipated. They only went about official business and called the 1,000-man commander of the 1,000 Guards Institute over. After making arrangements for the army to depart for Guangzhou tomorrow, they began to look forward to the banquet in the evening. The moonlight tonight was quite good. The moon hung high in the sky, illuminating the entire earth. It was as if the world was covered with a layer of mysterious white veil. When the hour of the 5 arrived, Lu Youfu sat in a sedan chair. Guan Ying rode a horse. The two groups arrived in front of the Yang mansion. Red lanterns were hung high in the air, creating a festive atmosphere. The two of them, who had something on their minds, were not in the mood to look at the scenery. With dark faces, they were led by Yang Wu to the banquet hall of the Yang mansion. Yang Chendong did not put on any airs. He had already taken his 2 wives to sit at the banquet. The only difference was that Hu Yan and Lady Shui's faces were covered with a veil. This was also due to the system of the time. It was not easy for women to appear in public. Come, Sir Lu, General Guan, please sit. Haha, welcome to my family banquet. This time, we will only talk about friendship and not official business. Yang Chendong, with a smile, warmly greeted the 2 people who came in. However, when he said they could not talk about official business, it was clear that Lu Youfu and Guan Ying's expressions became ugly. After saying this, he did not wait for the other party to reply. He turned his head and smiled. Come, please invite Miss Su. After saying this, he turned his head and said to Lu Youfu and Guan Ying, Sirs, would you like to listen to a new song I made? Good, good. They were going to go to war tomorrow. The two of them had no intention of offending Yang Chendong. They would go along with what he said first. It would not be too late to find an opportunity to ask about the war later. Su Maner came out. She had a slender waist, an exquisite figure, and exquisite facial features. The moment she appeared, Lu Youfu, who had once seen her from afar, widened his eyes at this moment. He stared at her without blinking. He had to admit that this woman could indeed be said to have a fatal attraction to men. Hu Yan's beauty lay in her quiet elegance. Madame Shui's beauty lay in her enchanting temperament. Su Maner, on the other hand, vividly displayed the gentle side of a woman from Jiangnan's water villages. Each had their own merits and characteristics. A maid had already placed the guzheng. When Su Maner walked over leisurely, she first bowed to Yang Chendong and the others. Then, she pulled up her skirt and sat down. Then she said in a very pleasant voice, Sirs, I am not talented, but I would like to present Sword and Saber are like a dream. Please appreciate it. After saying this, Su Maner gently raised her arm. Then, her slender fingers landed on the guzheng. A beautiful tune that was like the sound of nature rang out in the courtyard and drilled into the ears of everyone present. The prelude was not very long, but it had already attracted everyone's attention. Yang Chendong had closed his eyes long ago. He had an expression of great enjoyment. Then, the beautiful sound of Su Maner playing and singing by herself rang out in their ears. Where does my sword go? Love and hate, it's hard to be alone. My saber cuts through the sky. Right and wrong, I know but also don't know. I'm drunk, everything is hazy. It was really a good tune and good lyrics. This sword and saber are like a dream, was very suitable for playing the guzheng. After Yang Qindong listened to all the songs played by Su Maner these few days, he gave her this song. She had long heard that Yang Qindong had the title of Eastern Commander and was extremely talented. Now that she could finally receive a song personally bestowed by him, Su Maner felt as if she had received a treasure. With her talent in this area, the song was completed after just one night. Now that it was sung by her, the woman's voice had a hint of heroism to it, making it even more beautiful. Even Lu Youfu and Guan Ying were shocked by this song at this moment. They were quickly immersed in it with a look of enjoyment on their faces. Even if they were scholars, they might not be proficient in songs, but they would definitely listen and appreciate them. Now that they heard "Sword and Saber are like a dream," they really admired it. Soon, they revealed expressions of enjoyment similar to Yang Qindong's. When the song ended and the sound of the guzheng was still reverberating in the courtyard, the two of them opened their eyes reluctantly. At this moment, Yang Qindong's words were transmitted into their ears. Haha, Miss Su is indeed amazing. I'm afraid that only you can perform this song so wonderfully. All of this is thanks to the Emperor's grace, allowing Miss Su to come to this Imperial envoy's side. Su Maner, who originally had a humble expression, had to reveal an expression of guilt. But when she suddenly heard Yang Qindong's words, her expression tensed up and a hint of panic flashed across her face. The Emperor? Lu Youfu was listening enthusiastically. Suddenly, when he heard Yang Qindong mention the Emperor, his face was filled with confusion. On the other hand, Guan Ying's expression was extremely normal. It was obvious that he had already known about this matter. Noticing Lu Youfu's shocked expression, Yang Qindong smiled and said, Lord Lu, it's like this. This time, the Emperor appointed me as an Imperial envoy to quell the rebels in Guangdong. Because he considered that I am young and impetuous, he was afraid that I would be too lonely on the road and wouldn't be able to find anything fun. Thus, he invited Miss Su to accompany me. Sigh, this heart of sympathy really makes this subject feel fearful. So that's how it is. The Emperor's imperial favor to the Imperial envoy is truly enviable, truly enviable. Lu Youfu nodded his head as if he had just realized something. Then, he said a few flattering words. These words naturally caused Yang Qindong's expression to become complacent. However, what made people disappointed was that Su Maner suddenly stood up and bowed. "Three sirs, I am truly sorry. This servant suddenly feels unwell. Please excuse me." Her bashful appearance gave people a feeling of pity. How could such a request not be allowed? Yang Qindong immediately nodded his head and said, "Since you are feeling unwell, you should go and rest. I believe that the two sirs won't blame you." Of course. We still have to thank Miss Su for bringing us such beautiful music." Lu Youfu immediately expressed his position. From his point of view, this was clearly Yang Qindong exposing everything. No matter what, Su Maner was still a girl. Of course, she would feel embarrassed. Although Guaning didn't say it, he also had the same thought. However, although Yang Qindong had a smile on his face, he was a little more cautious in his heart. He had originally wanted to sound her out. By publicly revealing that Su Maner was sent by the Emperor, he also wanted to keep a close eye on this matter. In this way, if she wanted to do anything to him, it would represent Zhu Qizhen's intention. He didn't expect that after this test, this girl would indeed be unable to keep her composure. Although she seemed to want to retreat with a bashful expression, who knew if it was because of a guilty conscience? In any case, the probing this time was effective. Just as Su Maner brought her maid Xiao Yun and turned to leave, Yang Qindong inadvertently glanced at the deputy chief of the security bureau, Yang San, who was hiding in the dark, also left with them. However, because this action was done very discreetly, no one noticed it. Come, have a taste of this Imperial envoy's cooking. Let me tell you, this is something we can't buy even if we spend money on a normal day. Yang Qindong's gaze turned and landed on Lu Youfu and Guaning, looking like a host receiving guests. Good. I have long heard that the Imperial envoy has an expert chef by his side. This time, if I have the chance, I will have a good taste. Lu Youfu immediately said politely. As for whether he believed these words in his heart, that was another matter. Chapter 365. Su Maner brought her maid, Xiao Yun, and quickly returned to her courtyard. After that, Xiao Yun dismissed all the maids who were serving here. When only the master and servant were left, she anxiously said, "Young miss, how did he know that you were sent by the emperor? Could it be that Lord Guanning said it?" "It shouldn't be." At this moment, Su Maner had already regained her calm demeanor. However, her eyes were wrinkled, showing that she indeed had something on her mind. "If it wasn't Lord Guan who said it, then who could have told him?" Xiao Yun said with a worried expression. She had been by Su Maner's side since she was only 8 years old. Rather than calling her a maid, it would be more appropriate to call her a sister. Usually, the young miss would not hide anything from her. Naturally, she already knew about Su Maner's appearance here and what she wanted to do a while ago. In the beginning, Su Maner had even made the decision to let her leave. However, she was rejected by Xiao Yun. In her words, she and young miss were already as close as family. They should go through thick and thin together. The more important excuse was that once she left, it would be hard to avoid suspicion. Moreover, this matter was caused by the emperor. Without permission, she would not be able to leave even if she wanted to. Su Maner was naturally very touched by Xiao Yun's unwavering loyalty. However, when she thought of the benefits she could obtain after the matter was completed, she finally made up her mind to continue with the matter. However, she felt a little guilty that she might have implicated Xiao Yun. Now, in the face of Xiao Yun's question of who told Yang Chendong that she was sent by the emperor, Su Maner shook her head lightly. Now is not the time to pursue these matters. There is no point in doing so. What's important is how he sees it and whether he will be wary of us. If that's the case, I'm afraid that we will have to be extra careful with our every move. After all, you can see from our interactions these days that he is not simple. He might even be much smarter than we imagined. Although the two of them did not mention who he was, this name had long been understood. Other than Yang Chendong, who else could it be? Thinking of Yang Chendong, thinking of his talent and youth, Xiao Yun couldn't help but be moved as she said, "Miss, do we really have to do that? I think he's quite nice. If we give up on the plan and tell him everything, do you think he'll protect us?" "Protect us?" After Su Maner heard this, she shook her head. "Under the heavens, all lands belong to the emperor. We are just women. We just have some good looks. Who do you think would offend the emperor for us? Besides, it's not like you don't know that I'm not afraid of death. What I want is results. That way, even if I die in the underworld, I can still laugh. On the other hand, if you can't do it, even if you continue to live, what's the difference between you and a walking corpse?" As if she had said something sad, Su Maner's eyes revealed a sorrowful expression. "Miss, don't think so much. For your peace of mind, we'll just continue to do it. At most, we'll just die together. In the next life, we can still be good sisters." Xiao Yun looked at Su Maner's sad expression and couldn't help but say this. "Good sister." Su Maner looked at Xiao Yun with heartache. Then, the two of them hugged each other and cried bitterly. Other than the sound of crying, there was no other movement in the room. A black shadow by the window quietly left without anyone noticing. In the main hall, Lu Youfu and Guanning had eaten quite a lot. The kitchen maid, Yi Chou'er, had been with Yang Chendong for quite some time. Under various strict requirements, her culinary skills had become better and better. In addition, with the help of various high-quality condiments that she didn't have at that time, the food that she made was indeed extraordinarily delicious. On this point, even Lu Youfu and Guanning couldn't help but be convinced. The two of them also ate quite a lot and drank quite a bit of wine. During the banquet, the two of them had also asked about the war. However, Yang Chendong casually waved his hand. "It's fine. There won't be any problems in the Guangzhou prefecture. General Ma Wei has guaranteed that we can hold on for 10 days. You can rest assured." "All right, I said we won't talk about official matters. Come, let's drink." Although he said they wouldn't talk about it, Yang Chendong still gave the two of them a reassuring pill. Regardless of whether his words were trustworthy, since things had already come to this point, even if they had some worries and doubts in their hearts, it was useless. They might as well relax a little and drink while they had the wine. It didn't take long for the three of them to drink quite a lot. When they walked out of the Yang residence, Lu Youfu's body was a little shaky. Yang Chendong also looked like he had drunk too much. He had someone send them out of the residence. Without any outsiders, he quickly regained his calm appearance. This was his residence. The wine he drank had already been replaced with soft drinks. As such, other than feeling a little bloated, how could he be drunk? Since he wasn't drunk, he didn't immediately return to the bedroom to rest. Instead, he went to the study and saw Yang San, who had been waiting for him. When Yang San saw Yang Chendong, he came forward and said nervously and worriedly, "Young master, I heard some things. However, they didn't say much. I just felt that they seemed to want to harm you." "What's going on?" Yang Chendong's expression turned a little ugly. It seemed that the worst outcome had happened. Yang San didn't dare to hide anything. He told him everything that he had secretly heard of the conversation between the two girls. Then, he looked at Yang Chendong carefully and waited for the young master's orders. "What do you think?" Yang Chendong first closed his eyes and transmitted some of the information that he had heard. Then, he opened his eyes and looked at Yang San. "Young master, from what I see, these two girls obviously came with the intention to die. Although I don't know what they will choose to do, they definitely want to harm you. Since that's the case, why don't we just capture them and interrogate them? I'm not afraid that they won't tell us their purpose." Yang San made a grabbing motion. "No." Yang Chendong rejected. "If they really want to harm the young master, and they are here on orders, it won't help even if we capture them. If the mastermind's plan doesn't work, he will definitely come up with another plan. Instead of being on guard, why don't we just keep them and keep an eye on them?" "Young master, you are right. Since that's the case, I will send people to keep an eye on them. I will also send people to investigate and try to find out the truth." Yang San felt that Yang San's words made sense and nodded in agreement. Yes, it is necessary to investigate. However, if they are really here on orders from the emperor, there won't be many people who know about this matter. If that's the case, it will be very difficult to find out the truth. How about this? Make the arrangements. If you can investigate, investigate. If you can't, just let them go. Don't let them be on guard and alert them. Yang Chendong wouldn't underestimate anyone, not to mention Zhu Qizhen. Even if he was the emperor, he should have capable people by his side. Although the spies of the security bureau were very powerful, they couldn't cover everything. He didn't want their actions to cause Ying Zong to be on guard. Not only would they lose their brothers, but they would also change their strategy. "Understood. I thank the young master for your concern on behalf of my brothers," Yang San said sincerely with a face full of gratitude. The next morning, the people of the Yang residence packed up their things and left Guangzhou City. They met up with the Cold Front Battalion outside the city. The 1st and 3rd Battalions of the Cold Front Battalion were transferred away one after another. Only the 2nd Battalion and the direct subordinates led by Commander Luo Pe were left, totaling 400 people. As for the auxiliary soldiers, 4 battalions were transferred away. There was an ordinary battalion with 300 people and a reinforced battalion with 500 people, totaling up to 800 people. The mercenaries were left with 1,200 people. Lu Youfu and Guan Ying only had 1,000 soldiers with them. Both sides added up to 2,200 people. Looking at the pitiful number of soldiers, the officials of the Great Ming Dynasty were worried. In their minds, with only 2,000 soldiers, not to mention solving the crisis in Guangzhou, if they were to encounter the Yellow Bandits, it was unknown whether they would be able to escape alive. Very good, it's enough. On the other hand, Yang Chendong looked at the advancing troops that were constantly passing by and nodded his head in satisfaction. He even jokingly said to Lu Youfu and Guan Ying, who were following beside him, "It's good to have fewer people. They are more mobile and can move faster. They don't have to bring so much military supplies and fodder. It saves a lot of trouble." Yes, as the Imperial envoy says, it is true. Lu Youfu agreed with a bitter expression. However, in his heart, he thought that the only benefit of fewer people was that once they encountered an enemy, they could escape faster and would not be encumbered. Just as Yang Chendong said, they had more mobility. Regardless of what other people thought, Yang Chendong would not explain anything to them. After seeing the army depart as scheduled, he returned to the luxurious carriage to rest. If he could sit, he would not stand. If he could lie down, he would not sit. Once Yang Chendong entered the carriage, he quickly fell asleep under the care of Hu Yan and Lady Shui. Not long after, there was even the sound of light snoring. Guan Ying had originally wanted to come over and ask about the plan. He wanted to see what Yang Chendong was going to do next. What did he need him to cooperate with? However, when he arrived at a place not far from the carriage, he heard the snoring sound. His face immediately turned bitter, but at the same time, he began to feel anger in his heart. He even had the impulse to roar and drag Yang Chendong out of the carriage. He wanted to interrogate him on what he was thinking and what he wanted to do. However, all of these thoughts were dispelled when he saw Beta Persei guarding the carriage on a horse. If he did it forcefully, he would be the one to suffer. Of course, he was not afraid of suffering. He was not even afraid of death. However, because he disturbed Yang Chendong's rest and was beaten up, it did not seem worth it. Forget it. When we get to Guangzhou, I'll see what you do. Thinking angrily in his heart, Guanyin left to find paper and brush. He wanted to continue writing the battle report. He wanted to report all of Yang Chendong's inaction. He wanted the world to know how lazy this Imperial envoy was. He wanted the world to know that the so-called god of war was not worthy of his name. Chapter 366. Under Guanying's internal discussion, the group headed straight from Jiangxi's Guangzhou government to Guangzhou's government. Just as Yang Chendong had said, because there were few people, the amount of supplies they brought was also small, so the marching speed of the troops was very fast. The distance of 800 li only became shorter and shorter as they walked. On the first day, the black and white army had marched 150 li. Of course, this speed was only possible because Yang Chendong had made preparations early on. There were more carriages with the army. Once a soldier was tired, they could take turns to rest on them. On the first day, they traveled 150 li. After 4 hours of rest, the army continued to move forward. The 300 Ming soldiers who were originally at the front of the army were also replaced. The elite 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front was in charge of the vanguard. Imperial envoy, you can't go like this. If this continues, everyone will be exhausted before we reach Guangzhou's government. Lu Youfu panted heavily as he jogged to the side of Yang Chendong's carriage. His face was full of grievances. Guanyin also followed over. This time, he didn't say anything. With his physical strength, he could still keep up at this speed. Most importantly, he had a warhorse, so it was much easier. Is it very tiring like this? Is it very fast? The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Yang Chendong's face was revealed. However, from the way he spoke, he seemed to be very shocked. Of course it's fast. Imperial envoy, don't you know that our army's movement speed is usually around 60 li a day? Under the circumstances of rapid marching, 100 li is already the limit. If we travel 150 li a day, people will die. There will be big problems. His figure was already fat. After this torment, he was even more out of breath. Although Lu Youfu had a carriage to sit in, he was used to sitting in a sedan chair. It was very stable and stable, unlike this carriage which swayed back and forth for a day. It was enough to torment him to death. Yang Chendong listened to Lu Youfu's words. His face was full of disbelief. Sir Lu, didn't I already tell the army to bring less supplies? Traveling light should be faster, right? Yes, of course it's faster to travel light. However, it's still too much to travel 150 kilometers a day. Lu Youfu said resolutely. He didn't seem to have any intention of giving up. This was the first time he was so serious about something since he met Yang Chendong. When Yang Chendong saw this determined look, he knew that it would be very difficult to convince this person, so he simply gave up on the idea. Forget it. Since Lord Lu walks so slowly, I'll just stay behind. General Guan, you happen to be here as well. Let's see how many people in the army can't hold on any longer. Let them stay behind and slowly catch up. Of course, if anyone is willing to come with us, you can come with us. After saying this, Yang Chendong entered the carriage, leaving Lu Youfu and Guanyin outside. What? What does this mean? Lu Youfu's face was filled with doubt, and even some resentment. He looked at Guanyin as if he was complaining. At this moment, Guanyin was really angry. If Yang Chendong didn't inform him of the division of the army, he could tolerate it. After all, he was an imperial envoy and the main general. He could tolerate it if the army didn't go to the rescue of the Guangzhou government. After all, He didn't have much power and official position. However, now that the army had set out, Yang Chendong still acted as if he didn't care about the soldiers at all. He couldn't tolerate it when he gave the order to abandon the hall. There was no need to tolerate it anymore. At this moment, Guan Ying was ready to flip out. However, before he could say anything, the curtain of the carriage was opened again. Yang Chendong had changed into a camouflage military uniform and walked out. Yang Chendong, who was wearing a camouflage military uniform, easily made people's eyes light up. If it was said that wearing a green robe before could show off his scholarly temperament, now that he had changed into the uniform of a mercenary, he was really very heroic. The clothes seemed to be tailor-made for him. They fit him so well. A beret was worn diagonally on his head, making him look like a completely different person at this moment. The carriage will be left behind. I'll have to trouble Sir Lu to take care of it. I will personally follow the army. I don't ask for much. You can follow as fast as I can. How about it? All right, General Guan, you won't back out, right? The moment Yang Chendong landed on the ground in his shiny black combat boots, he said this with a calm attitude. Really? Guan Ying's eyes lit up when he heard that Yang Chendong was actually going to set out with the army. There's no joking in the army. Of course it's true. Haha, I'll go first. Follow me. Amidst the laughter, Yang Chendong had already started walking. Beside him, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and the others followed. Only Tai Chingy, a few female soldiers, and a squad of Lung Feng soldiers were left beside the carriage. The Imperial envoy was going to follow the army and walk at the very front. The requirement was that the army's speed was the same as his. When this news spread, it immediately caused a commotion. Some of the Ming soldiers who were originally thinking about whether or not to stay in the rear were all energized. During the Ming dynasty, the status of soldiers was not very high. In particular, soldiers were considered a lower class. However, compared to ordinary people, they had an advantage, which was that they could achieve military merits on the battlefield. Once they achieved military merits, they could be promoted from a soldier to an official and walk on the path of the sun. Therefore, once a war appeared and there was a chance to win, most soldiers would not think of giving up. They originally thought that with so few people and in such a state, would it be possible to win the battle after rushing to Guangzhou House? If they could not win, then it was better to stay in the rear. At least they could escape if the situation turned bad. However, when they heard that the Imperial envoy was going to follow them and that he was going to use his walking speed as a benchmark, everyone became excited. In their eyes, the so-called Lord was mostly an embroidered pillow. If he wasn't born well, then he was well educated. Compared to marching and fighting, he was naturally not a match for them. Now, this young Imperial envoy actually wanted to lead an army. Who was he looking down on? This also stirred up the competitive spirit of the Ming soldiers. They decided to use reality to give this Imperial envoy a slap in the face, and let him know that a true march was not something that could be measured by pointing and drawing on a map. The Ming soldiers became excited because of Yang Chendong's words. The 1,200 soldiers of the Langfeng and auxiliary soldiers seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. All of them were glowing. All the soldiers who had truly joined the Langfeng knew that the Imperial envoy was the sixth young master. He was their idol. Just being able to fight side by side with the sixth young master in this battle was enough for them to brag about when they went back, much less being able to walk side by side with the sixth young master. How proud was that? All of them were endlessly excited and wanted to use this opportunity to perform well. Other than the officers, the normal soldiers did not know Yang Chendong's true identity. However, the higher-ups had sent word that as long as they followed this Imperial envoy and performed well, they would have a higher chance of entering the Langfeng. This was something they had dreamed of. Since they had the chance, who would be willing to fall behind? They were also holding back their energy and wanted to perform well. There were also some auxiliary soldiers who thought their strength was not bad and wanted to use this opportunity to wrestle with the Langfeng to see who could walk better, who could walk faster, and who could last longer. They walked and competed. Under this kind of atmosphere, the soldiers became unprecedentedly excited. When Yang Chendong, who was wearing the same camouflage uniform as the Langfeng, appeared in front of everyone and walked to the very front of the Langfeng battalion, the entire troop was in an uproar. Guan Ying followed beside Yang Chendong to the very front of the troop. He also felt that there was something different about the atmosphere, but he only thought that everyone wanted to see the Imperial envoy make a fool of himself, so he did not take it to heart. Instead, he seemed to kindly remind Yang Chendong, Lord Imperial Envoy, please do not try to show off. If your stamina is not good enough, remember to say so. The army is still waiting for your command. Don't worry, this Imperial Envoy will not fall. You, on the other hand, must follow closely behind me. If you are left behind, you can find a horse to ride. Don't disgrace the name of the Ministry of War. How could Yang Chendong not know that the other party was looking down on him? He was not afraid of anyone when it came to the art of talking. Not to mention, ever since he became Yang Chendong, he had trained a lot. Usually, when he was at the Yang Manor, he would secretly increase his own strength. Everyone only saw that the sixth young master had run the same distance as everyone else, but they did not know how many sandbags were tied under his legs. Not to mention, in his previous life, Yang Chendong had participated in more than 10 emergency training sessions. Not to mention his speed, even his comrades could display the speed of a human body at critical times. Just like during the Wenchuan earthquake, his comrades had rushed to the earthquake zone at a speed of 200 kilometers a day. However, this was far from his limit. In short, Yang Chendong treated this march as a kind of warm-up training. He had no intention of showing off to others. It was with this thought that he relaxed his body and mind even more. When he rushed on the road, he took large strides and was extremely fast. The group began to move. Yang Chendong walked at the front of the group. Apart from a few cavalry scouts, there was no one else in front of them. There was no one blocking the front. Yang Chendong could display his speed and adjust his breathing at will. He could go fast or slow if he wanted to. It was very comfortable. Yang Chendong was like a pole, walking at the front of the team. At the beginning, he began to speed up again and again. His speed was indeed very fast. He was so fast that after only 3 li, he surprised Guan Ying. Although he was surprised, Guan Ying was not worried. Instead, he thought that Yang Chendong was trying to be brave. Even if he really wanted to rush, he should not continue at such a speed. Otherwise, later on, he would not be able to bear it. Even if he rushed to the battlefield in such a state, he would not be able to display the fighting strength he should have. Chapter 367. He wanted to remind Yang Chendong to pay attention to speed and frequency, but he considered that this was the best opportunity to slap him in the face. In the end, he swallowed the words he wanted to say. He wanted to see how long this person could pretend for. Contrary to what Guan Ying thought, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others, who had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years, were calm. If it had to be said, they were somewhat surprised. Their calmness came from their belief in the young master's personal strength. Their surprise came from feeling the self-confidence on the young master's body. They even had a feeling that the sixth young master's strength seemed to be even more unfathomable. Yang Chendong, who had just turned 21, was indeed in the best condition of his body. Compared to his previous life where he would inevitably suffer from hidden injuries after completing various missions, he was now completely unscathed. He only seemed to have an inexhaustible amount of strength. At this moment, he only wanted to sweat to his heart's content. Only by doing so could he feel extremely happy and comfortable. Thus, in the eyes of others, Yang Chendong, who was showing off, was just doing normal training. This was just walking. There was no need to run. In his mind, this could not even be considered a rapid march. Even if he could sweat, it would only be a small amount. In order to achieve the goal of sweating a little more while walking, Yang Chendong began to accelerate a few times in succession. This was just to expel more of the impure air in his body. Even if he did not think it was a rapid march, this kind of speed was already very fast in the eyes of others. Only 4 hours had passed, but there were already some Ming soldiers who could not hold on and wanted to fall behind. If it were not for the fact that they wanted to see how long this young Imperial envoy could hold on, and this curiosity was too great, there would probably have been more people who could not hold on. He really knows how to act, but he does have some strength. He actually managed to walk at a fast speed for 4 hours. Very good. I want to see how long you can last. Guan Ying thought to himself. Such a march was actually a challenge for him. In the past, when he was with the army, he always rode a horse. This time, he was not used to using his feet. In addition, Yang Chendong did not give everyone a time to adapt. Instead, he sped up in the eyes of others. This made this brave general feel more or less exhausted. Fortunately, Guan was young and had a good physique, so it was not impossible for him to hold on for 4 hours. Another 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. During this process, the team stayed behind for 15 minutes to eat and replenish their nutrition. As the saying goes, one is not afraid of walking slowly, but one is afraid of stopping. Once they stopped, they would feel all sorts of discomfort all over their bodies. It was normal for their backs and legs to ache. There were even some people who could not continue once they stopped and did not have enough time to rest. After 15 minutes of rest, more and more Ming soldiers fell out of the group. They could see that even if this young Imperial envoy was showing off, his ability to hold on was not something they could compare to. This person did indeed have some skill. General Guan also had the same thought. At this moment, he had to admit that this young loyal duke's physical strength was indeed very good. It was so good that even he had to admire it. However, if he admitted defeat like this, he could not. While eating, he was endlessly recovering his strength. He was also wondering whether Yang Qindong would continue to walk or whether he had finished showing off and was preparing to get on the horse. He did not give Guan much time to think. When Yang Qindong ate, his speed was indeed fast enough. If it was someone who did not know, they would not be able to link the way he ate just now to the Imperial envoy. He ate much faster than many people. After drinking water, Yang Qindong closed his eyes and rested. This was a habit he had developed in the past. He could always seize every minute on the battlefield and rest at the first moment. The benefit of this was that under the same level of training, he would have more energy and stamina than others. Sometimes, it was this extra bit that allowed him to become the final victor. When the 15 minutes were up, Yang Qindong quickly opened his eyes and set out on the journey in an easygoing and energetic manner. Moving with him were still Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, as well as even more Lung Feng and auxiliary soldiers. Compared to the Ming soldiers who were swaying left and right, unable to stand or sit properly, these 1,200 mercenaries still maintained their formation. Although some of them showed signs of fatigue, their energy was still quite good. Especially when the group was about to continue setting out and the commanders of the various battalions and platoons began to shout the order to gather, they moved even more quickly without any intention of dragging their feet. All of this, in Guan Ying's eyes, made his eyes sparkle. At this moment, he more or less felt the strength of the mercenaries. The group continued to move forward. Another 2 hours, 4 hours, 5.5 hours passed. People who had fallen behind began to appear one after another. There were almost no Ming soldiers left, and even among the auxiliary soldiers of the mercenaries, there were people who had fallen behind. On the other hand, the elite Lung Feng battalion did not fall behind, and they were still full of energy. This was the difference between a regular army and an auxiliary soldier. To become a member of the Lang Feng battalion, not only did they have to have a strong political background, they also had excellent military qualities. Even after a few hours of continuous marching, they still held their heads high, looked straight ahead, and strode forward. This march had indeed exceeded their usual training, but it was not as if this had never happened before. In order to train everyone, the Lang Feng battalion would often carry out such field training based on the basic idea of sweating more during normal times and bleeding less during wartime. In comparison, the current situation was nothing. Not to mention, their idol and spiritual pillar, the sixth young master, was walking at the front of the group. Even though the sky was completely dark, the figure holding the torch was still like a beacon, guiding everyone forward with large strides towards the bright and clear road that was filled with a beautiful future. Guan was tired. Very, very tired. He made a rough calculation. Excluding the 15 minutes of rest while eating, the group had been marching for 20 hours. They had walked for a total of 250 miles, which was close to a day's time. At this time, the sky had begun to brighten, indicating the arrival of a new day. Exhaustion and tiredness made him want to fall to the ground and sleep, but an unyielding spirit persisted in his body. This was perhaps the only motivation for him to persist until now. Everyone rest. You have 15 minutes to eat and drink. If there is someone who needs to relieve himself, please hurry. We will continue in 2 hours. The voice of the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Lung Feng Battalion, Chen Bo, finally rang out. With this shout, the group started to stop moving forward. Then, hundreds of groups disbanded. But even so, there was still not much noise, and no one complained. Some people just went to solve their own problems, And some even took out pieces of meat patties that were warmed by their bodies and wolfed them down. The 1st Lang Feng Battalion and the auxiliary soldiers had brought a lot of meat patties like this before they set off. In the bags behind them, there was enough food for them to eat for a few days. After every rest, they would take out new meat patties from the bags and put them in their clothes. When they waited for the next time to eat, it would be warm again. The benefit of this was that it could save time to eat. Most of the time, if you could save a minute here, you would have a higher chance of winning on the battlefield. 3 large meat patties were also stuffed into Guan Ying's hands. He was indeed hungry and extremely sleepy, but for some reason, he did not immediately go to eat. Instead, he began to pant heavily. He knew clearly that after 2 hours, he would not have the strength to continue walking. "How are you? Tired, right?" At some unknown time, Yang Chendong's voice rang out by his ear. This made Guan Ying, who had just closed his eyes and almost fallen asleep, forcefully pull himself awake. "Haha, that's right. I'm really tired. Lord Imperial Envoy, I really didn't think that you would be so powerful when you walk. I've indeed underestimated you before. I apologize to you." Guan Ying's words fell into Yang Chendong's ears and made him laugh out loud. "General Guan, you have already done very well. At least compared to the other Ming soldiers, for you to be able to persist until now is already very impressive. I am also very impressed." "Haha." Guan Ying, who gave a bitter smile, felt a sense of shame. He thought of how he had wanted to see the other party make a fool of himself a day ago. Only now did he know how arrogant he had been at that time. This also perfectly explained the phrase, "There would always be someone stronger in the strong." In the future, he would not dare to underestimate anyone like this. Guan Ying even found it difficult to speak. Yang Chendong knew that the other party's physical strength had probably reached its limit, so he said with concern, "You should stay and rest for a while. If possible, after you wake up, organize the remaining soldiers and have them make meat pies. In this kind of weather, the meat pies can't be stored for long. That's right, when you make the meat pies, you can't have too little meat. It has to be the kind of meat that has a bite and is very chewy. As for how much silver I spent, I'll give it all to you later. In short, we can't treat these soldiers unfairly. Are there any problems with completing this mission?" "No problem," Guan Ying said with a solemn vow and a tone of guarantee. He did not know that at this moment, he was very much like Yang Chendong's subordinate. "Good, then I'll have to trouble you. Rest well, haha." After Yang Chendong finished speaking, he patted Guan Ying's shoulder and stood up. It looked like he was going to walk around and take a look. This made Guan Ying couldn't help but ask, "Sir, are you not tired?" Chapter 368. How can they not be tired? But the soldiers are tired too. They need to be comforted. Sometimes, a general is more like a parent. You must know how to care for your soldiers. Only then will they work harder on the battlefield and bring you more glory. Yang Chendong turned around and said this casually. He then walked toward the other soldiers under the protection of Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others. Guan Ying slowly closed his eyes as he recalled Yang Chendong's words. He really wanted to comprehend the deeper meaning of this sentence, but he was too sleepy at the moment. He did not have a good rest when he left Guangzhou Prefecture, and after nearly 20 hours of rapid marching, he was already sleepy. After closing his eyes for a few breaths, deep snoring sounds came from his mouth. Yang Chendong did not rest. He was tired, especially a little sleepy. But as a leader, he had to persevere and he could still persevere. Needless to say, he had already taken a nap when they were marching in the middle of the night. The only difference was that he was sleeping while standing up. This seemed a little inconceivable, but for those who had marched in a hurry, they could only rely on their comrades in the front and back. This kind of sleeping while marching was nothing out of the ordinary. As he walked among the various troops, he merely greeted the 4 companies of the Cold Vanguard Battalion, and it was considered that he had seen them. Yang Chendong was not worried at all about the Cold Vanguard Battalion who had gone through many tests and used him as their spiritual support. Instead, he was more concerned about the 800 auxiliary battalions. When Yang Chendong arrived at the auxiliary battalions, he was quickly surrounded by platoon and company-level officers. "You guys have worked hard. You guys are also good. Your courage and stamina are not inferior to the Cold Vanguard battalions. This makes me very happy. Yang Chendong praised them as soon as they met. The officers smiled happily and contentedly at this compliment. Those who were able to become officers of the auxiliary troops were those who had strong political ideologies. In fact, many of them had come from the ranks of the Cold Vanguard. If they were trained as officers here, it wouldn't take long for them to return to the Cold Vanguard, and they would be heavily valued. Their future would also be bright. These people naturally knew Yang Chendong's true identity. When they saw the highest leader of Xianxia praising them, how could they not be happy? After a round of affirmation, Yang Chendong continued to state his expectations. Tell the soldiers to hold on until we arrive at the Guangzhou prefecture. We'll take a good rest after we resolve the crisis there. By then, anyone who has an auxiliary soldier who performs meritorious deeds will be given priority to join the Cold Front. This was a promise. With this promise, the officers from the battalion to the company level became excited. Since they were able to become military officers, they naturally had the qualities and conditions to become leaders. In the Cold Front, the evaluation for officers was different from normal soldiers. The evaluation was based on how many merits they could lead the soldiers to, not how many merits they had. This was especially so for the officers of the auxiliary battalion. The proportion of their auxiliary soldiers who met the requirements to join the Cold Front and the relative merits they would receive were also important aspects of the evaluation. Yang Chendong had said that those who made contributions this time would be given priority in entering the Cold Front. That was giving them a head start on their military merits. How could they not be excited? After a short conversation, Yang Chendong left and came under a tree. He leaned against the tree and closed his eyes, quickly recovering his mental and physical strength. However, the auxiliary battalion was already in an uproar. When the various battalion and company-level officers spread his words, many young men who had the ambition to join the Cold Front became excited. In Crimson City, if one were to ask who was the most popular person, it would undoubtedly be the Cold Warrior. Those who could join the Cold Front and become an official soldier could enjoy many benefits. Everyone was envious of them. Just the monthly salary alone was enough to feed a family of 5 and still be wealthy. Those who had a Cold Front soldier at home could enjoy all sorts of benefits even in business and farming, making others envious. Building an army with elite soldiers, waiting for soldiers with generous rewards, strict management of the army, and fair military merits were the standards that Yang Chendong proposed. Under such standards, as long as one had the ability and was able to perform well, one would not have to worry about being robbed of one's military merits. One would not have to worry about being buried, and one would not have to worry about the schemes of one's family or the future. One only needed to train hard and perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield. It was because of such treatment that everyone yearned to join the Cold Front. That was why Yang Chendong had opened his mouth. Everyone was extremely excited. This excitement lasted until the end of the 2-hour break. When the army once again advanced towards the prefecture of Guangzhou, many of the auxiliary soldiers began to speed up. They stuck to the back of the Lang Vanguard troops like sticky plasters, bringing immense pressure to the 4 companies of the Lang Vanguard that were advancing in front. Young master, there are many good seedlings among the auxiliary soldiers. Tiger's Mane followed Yang Chendong's footsteps with large strides, occasionally turning back to speak excitedly. It's good to have good seedlings. This is our hope. Yang Chendong nodded happily. A fresh army was the hope of an army's future. Only when the army continued to be younger and had a continuous influx of fresh blood could the army be invincible and win more battles in the future. Tiger's Mane, it seems like these kids still have a lot of energy left. We need to increase the amount. Are you okay with that? Yang Chendong also noticed that the soldiers behind him were moving faster and faster. They even seemed to have the intention of catching up to him. Thus, he was also interested and brought up the matter of increasing the amount. Come on, young master. Tiger's Mane also feels that there is an endless amount of energy in his body. Ha! Me too. Beta Persei chimed in from the side. In fact, this kind of marching did not have much of an advantage for someone of his stature. Because of his height and strength, it was more strenuous to walk. However, this disadvantage did not seem to be reflected on his body at all. Relying on his long legs and large strides, he actually kept half a step behind Yang Chendong without the slightest intention of falling behind. Seeing that the two beside him were so excited and unwilling to admit defeat, Yang Chendong laughed heartily. Then, He glanced at the commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment, Luo Pa, who was 3 to 4 meters behind him. Commander Luo, do you want to increase the amount? 6th Young Master, I think it's okay. When Yang Qindong called out his name, Luo Pa was very excited. Although he was considered a high-ranking officer in Xianxia's army, he did not have much time to interact with Yang Qindong. Now that he could be in close contact with him and have a better opportunity to perform, of course, he would not let go of it. These kids usually have too much energy. Today is a good opportunity to see where their limits are. After receiving Luo Po's affirmative answer, Yang Qindong laughed and said, "Good, since that's the case, let's increase the amount. Let's go." Then, the speed of the troops began to increase. From afar, the troops were like a gust of wind, blowing across the southern land. Below Guangzhou City. Today was the 8th day of the siege. As the capital of Guangdong, the importance of Guangzhou City was self-evident. Once they conquered this place, they could announce the fact that Guangdong had fallen to the outside world. Only then would they be able to better coordinate with King Min Zhuang in Yunnan and achieve his political goals. Huang Yuliang was able to make such a name for himself and have so many subordinates a year after his father and brother passed away. It was all thanks to the changes in the situation. If it was not for King Min Zhuang, Zhu Huixin, causing trouble in Yunnan, even if they did not die, they would only be able to wander around like stray dogs. Huang Yuliang knew the importance of having an ally. Even if he knew that conquering Guangzhou City would likely lead to the southern Ming army surrounding him, he had no choice but to do so. Moreover, when that time came, it was uncertain whether the southern Ming army would still have the strength to deal with him. In the end, conquering Guangzhou City was the most important problem at hand. Once he conquered this place, the other 3 armies under his command would be able to coordinate with each other. At that time, he would truly have the power. However, such an important place had not been conquered even after 8 days of siege. 8 days of siege had far exceeded the initial military plan. Due to the lack of success, the morale of the Yellow Bandit army had been severely affected. As a mixed army that did not have much training and was mostly made up of rebellious civilians, they had a fatal characteristic, which was the problem of morale. If they won the battle, everything would be fine. Especially when the battle went smoothly, they would often be able to display more strength than before. However, at the same time, once the battle became a stalemate, the mixed army would be anxious and each of them would have their own plans. Just like now, when the order was given, the leaders of the so-called rebel army were not as obedient as they were a few days ago. Each of them seemed to be conserving their strength. Regarding this situation, Huang Yuliang even killed a small leader who had a few hundred subordinates who refused to advance, scaring some of them into putting in more effort. However, in front of the tall city walls and the Ming army of Guangzhou City that was desperately defending, their progress was still slow. What is going on? Can we take down Guangzhou City? What is Ma Wei trying to do? If he continues to defend like this, he will not have enough soldiers sooner or later. Does he want to be a general without an army? In the tent, Huang Yuliang was furious. He had a frightening look on his face as he reprimanded the subordinates beside him. Huang Yuliang was furious, and the battle was not going smoothly. The other generals naturally lowered their heads and did not say anything. However, his trusted general, Geng Jun, who was the head of the 4 heavenly kings under Huang Yuliang, stood out. Young master, this Ma Wei is unmoved by force or persuasion. I think he is waiting for reinforcements. We only need to dispel his worries, and Guangzhou City will fall without a fight. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.